Okay. You're also streaming live on YouTube. So if you stepped out of Zoom for whatever reason, you can watch this live streaming on YouTube on the Oregon Brewers Guild channel. We are good. All right. We've got 45 in so far. So whenever you want to start, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much, Christina. We'll check back in with you about some of the housekeeping things in a few minutes. I'm going to share my screen right now, and this will be the main slide deck for the member meeting. Welcome, everyone. My name is Doug Heineman. I'm with Elliott Bay Brewing Company. We are brew pub group in Seattle, Washington, and happy to have you all back here virtually. You know, we did our best and had our fingers crossed for as long as we could cross our fingers for the in-person meeting, but here we are. We're Zooming. We'll work our way through this agenda. Got a malt and hop report. We'll have the officers present their respective reports on financials and membership and scholarships and BOG, and then we're going to have a special guest appearance by Susan Welch. We'll be speaking about the BAI committee work at the national level. And then we'll wrap up a couple of new business items, talk about future meetings, and then hand it off to Mr. Fulweiler and his technical program, or the technical program he's put together for us. So just kind of something I'd like to share with folks who may not be familiar. There are a handful of things that MBAA has going on that happen at the national level. One of them, which is going on next weekend, is the MBAA National Conference. Their annual conference is going to be in Cleveland. If you haven't made arrangements for this, you're probably not going, but just share it with you anyway. And then there is a virtual part of the meeting, which is happening the following weekend.
Doug, sorry to interrupt you real quick. Do you want to be sharing your screen? Because I do not see it.
Oh, I do want to share my screen.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Let's see. Share screen. How's that?
Better. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Anyway, I won't rehash that bit of information. But this slide there was the link to the information about the national conference and the dates of the in-person and the virtual segment. Okay. Trying to, oh, nope. A little bit of delay there, sorry. MBAA also does podcasts on a pretty regular basis. John Price is the host of those podcasts, and they cover all sorts of topics, and many times draw their presenters from people who've done in-person presentations at district meetings. So he kind of selects from that population of people who are presenting in districts all over the country, and interviews people, maybe goes a little more in depth in some of their presentations. And so if you haven't tuned into that, it's definitely a worthwhile exercise. And there's the whole archive of, he's got more than 200 podcasts now, maybe close to 250. So that's another good resource if you're in, you don't even have to be an MBA member to to access the podcast. Presentation archives, we've talked about this before. District Northwest, along with districts all over the country and a couple of international districts, post presentations. Some just slides, some slides and recordings to the archives that are housed on the MBAA.com website. So there's the link pathway to those archives, and you can also do a search there if you're looking for a particular topic. And they, cover all sorts of different topics that may have been developed and delivered to districts all over. So another good resource. This you do have to be a member to access. And the Technical Quarterly is another one of the National's long-running projects that is a journal that is kind of maybe a little more research-based sometimes, but they also have papers that are much more practical and maybe operations based and not necessarily research based in the sense that people have delivered things there that they've worked on in their own breweries and may not have a large research sample base, but we're talking about some of the things that they worked on and conclusions they've arrived at in their own operation. So that's another good resource to check out. That's another searchable database. For those who are not yet members, MBA through the end of the year is offering 20% off new memberships. You can follow that link to the membership page and go through the checkout process, and near the end when you're checking out, enter beer 2021 and you will receive 20% off your initial membership. So a nice way to encourage new members to get involved. So this is again our agenda screen, and we'll bounce back to this and have highlighted sort of what's next and what's active. So I'd like to introduce Christina LaRue, who's been our event coordinator and coordinator extraordinaire over the years, and Zoom master.
I don't know about master, but
hey, if we're allowed to call ourselves master brewers, you can call yourself a Zoom master.
Zoom master, event master. Oh, thank you, Doug. Well, hello, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Christina. My day job is the executive director of the Oregon Brewers Guild, but I've been with this group for many, many years. Started back in, I think it was like 2006. Anyhow, so just a couple housekeeping things. If you bounce off of Zoom, you can find us, we're live streaming it on the Oregon Brewers Guild YouTube channel. So if you just go to YouTube and search Oregon Brewers Guild, you will find this meeting being live streamed. We are going to, I sent out the minutes to everyone who was registered. So Doug will be going through that to approve the minutes. I'll put a poll up. So you'll see a poll pop up on your screen. You'll just click yes or no if you approve. Your video and your audio are off as attendees. So as we go through these presentations, you can submit your questions. At the bottom of your screen, you should see a Q&A button. Please use that to submit all of your questions for presenters. That's the the tool that we're going to be using to ask questions. If you have a technical issue or you have a question for myself or for Doug, go ahead and use the chat and chat us directly. You can message us directly. But any other questions for presenters, please use the Q&A box. And then our happy hour. So at the end of our presentations today, and I think the schedule says 4 o'clock. Sometimes we may go over a little bit, but just know that after all of the presentations are finished today, that we will move into a virtual happy hour. So we invite everyone to stay on, grab a beer. Anyone who stays on, I'm going to move you over so that your video and your audio, you can use that so we can see your faces and we can chat with each other. And sorry, Lindsay, I'm going to move you over to. Sorry, technical, the world of Zoom. So yeah, we'll do a happy hour, like an hour or so, just to give people the chance to catch up, because we do miss seeing all of you. And we're bummed that we couldn't make it in person this time, but we definitely will see you in the spring in Hood River. And that's all I have.
Right. Thank you, Christina.
Yeah, Lindsay, I'm gonna move you off of this and into attendee mode, and then I will move you back when you're ready to present. And I'll get ready to move Tyler over. So go ahead, it's all yours, Doug.
Yeah, I'm trying to advance my slide here. I don't know what happened. Okay, there we go. Okay, so it's per usual, we have a malt and hop report segment of our member meeting. And we try to gather information from different sources each time. And so this time we're going to have a presentation by Tyler Scholes from Great Western Malting. Welcome, Tyler. Tell us all about what's going on in maybe after the malt harvest.
Yeah. My heart rate isn't up because of malt harvest right now, but it has been in the past a couple of weeks, that's for sure. Typical 108 heartbeat prior to a presentation, all good to go. So I'm going to share my screen here, and I've got a couple slides to go through if it's all right with you guys.
Yep.
All right. I think I've done it correctly. Can everybody see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you very much for the opportunity to talk on crop this year. It's a very relevant topic, even more so than previous years. I feel like there's a lot of emphasis on what's happening in the barley world right now from a maltster's point of view, and previous to that, a farmer's point of view, and it's about to hit the brewer. So I'm going to jump into the slides. We're going to talk briefly about the North American market conditions and outlook in the US and Canada specifically, and then we're going to anticipate some of the changes to the 2021 certificate of analysis. You know, broadly speaking, we're not at the point of definitively saying where this is going just yet, but we're getting closer with the data we've gathered to date as a group, and North America has an outlook in front of it now. So we'll talk that over here shortly. So from a North American barley production standpoint, it seems like the maps are showing, and all of the discussion is telling us that it's been a very atypical year. That most, if not all, growing regions have suffered from a similar weather system. And you can see here on the crop report kind of outlook as far as precipitation is concerned, that big red band or lack of blue band on the left indicates that most of the growing regions that produce a good chunk of barley this year, we're under some form of drought, if not, severe drought or exceptional drought, a mild, moderate case of drought, to say the least. Along with the drought this year, there was also a double bite by Mother Nature. Misery loves company, as some people like to say, and pre-sprout has reared its head again as well. So not only did we have drought, but we also had rain at harvest in a lot of the growing regions. So with that said, some of the numbers that we're looking at this year, BA number or AMBA numbers to start with. It looks like this year we're going to be down to about 117 million bushels. If we were to capture that in metric tons, we're looking at about 2.56 million metric tons versus a 3.6 number from last year. A considerable decrease. And looking at some of these numbers and the hardest hit regions, you can see that yields are down quite substantially across the US for barley. To dig in a little bit deeper, Idaho below average on yields, down about 15%. Protein's up about 1.5%. 11.5 to 13.5 protein range in Idaho. Montana irrigation has below average yields and quality. Dry land down severely more than irrigated land. And all in all, we're looking at average protein between 12.5 to 13.5 with a high of maybe 16 out of coming from Montana. North Dakota, very poor, yields reduced down 30 to 50%, plumps decent, but high protein again, ranging from 13.5 to 15.5 protein. And Oregon, Washington, more dry land than irrigated, as we're well aware of. Yields are down about 40 to 50%. La Grande has a little bit better off with some irrigated land in there, but Palouse and Klamath, South Oregon, North California, took a pretty big pounding this year. So small pockets of good quality here and there across Oregon and Washington, but very patchy. Protein range, anywhere from 11.5 to 15% protein. Some silver lining, dawn and vomit toxin, not really present at all this year. Go figure. That drought has driven off a lot of the moisture that is required for sporulation and capture during flowering stage. So dawn and vomit toxin are negligible this year. And I did get a quote from one of our guys. In 30 years in being in the business of procuring barley or various other roles, this is one of the most challenging crops he's ever seen, as far as a procurement standpoint and overall, malting quality standpoint. Yields impacted, protein impacted, pre-harvest sprout on the books as well. So it's looking like it's going to be a challenging year. From just a overall overarching standpoint, we mentioned rain and snowpack or lack thereof for this year, but we're going to need it in order to replenish dwindled water supplies. Total production down, we talked about that already. Harvest was effectively complete as of mid-September. Pre-harvest sprouting, crop quality, we rank right now toward average across all major growing regions. And of the samples analyzed to date, there's been roughly a 1.5 to 2.5% uptick in protein content versus 2020 crop. We're down about 10 to 15% on plumps, 764s and 664s, and about 10 to 15% pre-harvest damage as we stand right now. When we get into the Canadian barley crop report, all part of the same family, North America has been impacted. Early indication was that we were going to receive about 7.1 million metric tons out of Canada with an estimated early stage of 12.5. So we were down to 7.1 already, but recent data has shown that we're probably closer to 6 million metric tons in Canada. So more than 50% decrease in yields across Canada this year. I haven't dug into the details for Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, but it's pretty much widespread. The messaging is pretty clear coming out of Canada as it stands right now. Current soils left very dry with the drought this season. Winter months, the prairies will need sufficient moisture to replenish and get over the lasting drought effects. Canada, around 6 million metric tons, rated poor to average. Again, rain and harvest has presented us with pre-harvest sprout damage. Of the analyzed samples to date that I'm aware of, I noted and highlighted in red some of the changes from the US crop to Canadian crop. That elevated proteins are even higher in Canada with a range of 1.5 to 3% uptick versus 2020. And plumps are down up to 20% versus 15% in Canada versus 2020. And then pre-sprout harvest damage is up, instead of 10 to 15, it's up 10 to 25%. Again, I queried a couple of people in Canada, and 25 years with the company or in the malting business and procurement of barley, this is one of those years where they're saying this is one of the worst they've ever seen. Another quick note on Canada is that there is zero barley carryover this year. So our crop inventories are depleted, and this is driving prices through the roof. Average feed prices, $10 plus a bushel. And it's unheard of. So tack on, prime real estate barley for malting quality, and the prices are pretty insane right now in the barley world for replacement barley. So when we look at overall anticipating the crop for 2021 COA, carbohydrate package, plumps and extracts to be considerably lower than previous year. -10 on plumps, -2 on fine grind dry basis. So the starch package, the filling process of the plant didn't occur. It was fast tracked through the drought, and the suitcase is only half full this year versus full versus previous years. On a protein and enzyme package front, enzyme package will be elevated from last year, where we might see a 135 BP max. Well, that could be up to a 150. Where we might see a 65 alpha amylase max, that could be up to 75. And anything protein driven is going to see an uptick this year. 1.5 to 3% on total protein. FAN content, for those sensitive to FAN, could see an uptick of 20 to 30 milligrams per liter of ppm in FAN. So there are some challenges that are coming our way very, very soon. Pre-germ is a challenge for maltsters along with high protein. And I put a comment on here that nothing is official until the barley has been extensively malted and blended. And we're getting to the point now where we're starting to process a lot of the new crop. We're gaining intel every day. Our data pool becomes more robust. So there'll be messaging going out shortly, if it hasn't been out already, with determination of where we see the specification going for the year. I kept it under 10 minutes on the slide details. It is a little bit of doom and gloom, well, more than a little bit, but I will say that ending on a positive note is always important. We are seeing and are encouraged right now by early malting of new crop that it is actually performing better than expected in the malt house. Not to say that our starting material hasn't changed. It still is high protein. It still is pre-germ, pre-sprout. That said, we have been able to manage it to date through the malt house, and early indication is that the barley is cooperating with us and at least absorbing moisture and being able to be modified. Early stages, but positive note to end on. Encouraged that barley is actually malting, and we may be able to provide a little bit better than what it was originally expected, but that's to be determined. So I will leave it at that. I'm going to go to Q&A really quickly here. Will maltsters favor high BG to keep FAN and STT down? Is a question that came from Campbell. I'll answer it live. Well, Campbell, we're still assessing the overall input of protein content across the board in the US and Canada. Initial interpretation of protein content will be that, as always, maltsters will err on the side of caution, I would think, and promote a little bit more modification up front to get BGs and check that the barley is actually performing in the malt house, that we're modifying enough. We don't want to throw too high BGs off the start. But after that, what may happen is maltsters may get used to the crop. They will get used to the crop, and there'll be some fine tuning of recipe development for future batches that may indicate or drive towards a slightly reduced modification profile, as long as BGs are kept in check. But it's going to be a balancing act. It's absolutely going to be a balancing act with regards to beta-glucan, FAN, SCT, overall modification, and the spec in general, the COA in general, across the board. Wheat crop this year, a little bit less impacted, but still impacted by drought. We're seeing higher protein content in wheat. I don't have a detailed report on wheat at this point in time, but any of the growing regions where wheat was present, are similar growing regions to that of barley. So it's inevitable that that drought has hit it in some way, shape, or form and driven protein content up. Lots of questions coming in now. What are the consequences to breweries if this continues over the next year? Estimated cost increase, shortage of orders. So I can't comment on shortage of orders. I think everybody, maltsters are working towards securing the volume they need for their customers, and that's up to the individual maltster to kind of facilitate and communicate their challenges or successes with procuring the amount of barley required for each individual customer. Estimated cost increase with barley right now, replacement barley on average is anywhere $400 USD plus in the US and anywhere $450 US plus in Canada. So where a typical crop year that I'm used to may come in at, you know, say sub 350 in all the years that I've been in malting. You know, 450 plus numbers are a shocker, and those get, you know, passed along in overall price of malt delivered to brewery. So cost increase could be anywhere from, you know, call it $100 per metric ton up to $200 per metric ton of barley alone, and that's going to be felt by some that haven't booked early enough and take advantage of less volatile portion of the year, Jan, Feb, March, for contracting barley. Dana Johnson has a question regarding high protein contents. Higher protein levels than normal, do you expect there might be higher foam encountered in boiled fermentation? Well, I would assume that there is some additional foam potential due to protein content this year with a 1.5 to 3% increase. We are developing a game plan as to what brewers can use as aids and adjustments in order to compensate for some of the changes in their spec. And some of those include controlling, you know, foaming, controlling inputs, nitrogen inputs, controlling rests, controlling hot and cold side finings, re-optimizing kick, whirl flock, Irish moss accordingly to protein spec to make sure that we can mitigate the risk of this higher protein year. So with that said, I'm sure there will be more questions to come. And if there are, Christina has told me that she can get those to me after hours, and there may be opportunity within the next hour to talk about it, but that's all I have for now. Thanks, Doug. I'll pass it on. Appreciate the time once again to educate everybody on what's coming down the tubes. And last thing I could say is we're in it together. So, you know, speak to your maltster, keep comms open, ask the tough questions. This is a partnership this year, and we're going to collaboratively approach how we deal with this crop. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Tyler. If you could stop the share there, and I'll jump over to sharing my screen. Okay. Next up is Hop Report. Mr. Pete from Yakima Chief. What do you got for us?
Hey, Doug. How's it going?
Real good.
Good. So I'm going to share my screen. I have a couple slides and can try and talk through it here real quick. You guys see the slide real quick?
Yes.
Perfect. So Pete Venegas, Yakima Chief. So I've been to plenty of meetings in the Mount Hood area. So happy to be on board and happy to be invited. So we'll walk through it, and any questions afterward, happy to try and answer them. Maybe not. Zoom is not liking me right now. Give me a second.
Pete, is it not letting you move the slides forward?
It is not.
Okay. Do you want to send those to me and I will put them up on my screen? Sorry, folks, just a little technical issue, and we will take care of this right now.
Forward. Christina. Do I have your, I might not have your right.
So just if you want to send it to Christina.mbaanorthwest@gmail. And folks, if you're just joining us, please feel free during presentations to drop your questions use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen instead of the chat function. We'll be using the Q&A box for all questions today. And please know, as an attendee, your video and your audio are turned off. Let me know when that's gone through.
Can you repeat that again? Sorry.
Oh, sure. Christina, Christina.
Yeah.
Dot MBAA NW.
Give me a second. MBAA.
NW.
Yep.
At Gmail.
So it's sent.
Okay. Just give me 1 second for it to come through. Sorry, folks, for the delay. Sorry, I'm just waiting for them to come through. I don't see them.
It shows as sent and it hasn't come back as a non-deliverable.
Okay. Could just be Gmail.
Do you want to try sharing your screen again? Just see if maybe it going to let you advance now.
Yeah, you can try it again while we're waiting patiently for it to come through.
Are you sharing your screen now, Pete? Because I can see the 5 slides in PowerPoint. You're muted right now.
So you can't see that?
I can't see that. I can see that
Yeah.
it's like the PowerPoint interface. So
Why don't you hit slideshow?
yeah, that down the bottom.
Can you see it? That I've got it in slideshow right now.
It's still. I mean, my screen is showing the PowerPoint, so
Yeah.
point interface. So you might just click on slide 2. Well, depending on what you're seeing, you maybe go back to the PowerPoint version.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Where you're able to edit and just click on the second slide.
And I'm still waiting for them to come through. Shouldn't have been that big of a file. I don't know why they're not coming through. Okay.
Can you see that, Doug?
Yep, that looks like the second slide.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that, folks.
Okay.
I've been having issues with Zoom. There's times where it works for me. There's times where it doesn't work for me. And it's this whole new world of Zoom. Okay, so bear with me. It might not look as pretty. It might not look in slide presentation, but we'll just page down and see how far we get. And if not, we'll just continue with some talking points. So as some of you know, extreme heat that we had in June, July was just unbearable. Washington, Oregon, as all of you living in the Pacific Northwest know, we got those 117 degrees heat. Idaho, as they didn't get the 117, they did get a couple of weeks of 100-degree heat plus. Early concerns. Everyone was just worried. I could remember getting phone calls throughout the year, throughout the summer. And it's like, you need to come to Oregon. You need to come to Washington. One of the things that I was quick to remind people is like, well, what am I going to go and see right now? The big thing for us is going to be how's the plant going to react? Is it, do people, are they going to take care of it? Are they giving it plenty of water? Those plants, they're very resilient. It's a reason why hops grow very well in the Pacific Northwest. Some plants do like that heat. They don't like the extreme heat, but we can produce a crop. And as later we found out, they rebounded very well. Farms took action. Most people saw the extreme heat coming, and people were monitoring their water. There's a lot of people that are using now technologies that have groundwater monitoring, and we're feeding the plants. But with that extreme heat, there were plants and fields that I put it. It looked like, and most of you on social media were able to see, looked like somebody had flown over the fields in a helicopter with flamethrowers off the top. There was fields that got singed very hard. So how did we go about it? How did the harvest go? The one thing that more than ever, there's dry matters taken. Dry matters is a process of going and taking cones and sampling for cones and making sure that maturity was there prior to picking. One of the things that we did see is there was a late start. So in taking your dry matters, typical start to harvest didn't happen. In cases in farms, there's 3 to 5 days of just delayed. The other thing that happened were farms got started to pick, and if the dry matters weren't there, say this field is mature, you could start picking it. There's pauses within harvest. There's people who took 3 or 4 days off right at the beginning, unheard of in the Pacific Northwest. This last year was my 35th harvest. I've never seen people take a weekend off. There was plenty of weekends taken off by different farms this year. The other thing that happened in Idaho is as water issues. You heard it from the report here early on. There were some districts that lost water about the 15th of September. So there was people knew about it, and they were trying to mitigate that, but there were some water shutoffs in Idaho. For those of you who have seen some of the cones or some of the samples that have sent out, I've never seen this before. You usually can see two separate cone sizes in some of the samples or in some of the lots that you get. This year you could get 3 different cone sizes, or you could get all of one size cone, very smaller cone or very large cone. The picture you see there is a picture of Idaho 7. You could see even within that cone itself, the petiole structure, and even in that petiole structure, it looks like the same cone, but in true honesty, that petiole structure on the side of each cone, that's just determining the length of the cone itself, and each one of those petioles is how it's attached to the strig in the center. So you were even seeing variability even if you saw a cone size to size, but cone weights were also affected. So there is some variability this year, but again, we're monitoring everything. We're taking a look at results from the lab. One of the things that we are seeing in some of the aroma varieties. So I'm going to get into a couple specifics. So for Centennial, for us this year, it looked like early on within the heat itself, it was going to get hit pretty hard. But at the end of harvest, we were pleasantly surprised at for us, we came in at what we had projected yields to be. So for us, Centennial did very well for us. Cascade, and again, I'm pointing out just a couple varieties. Cascade for us, for people who don't know, there are some fields out there that have quite a bit of virus load, that there are viroids in the plantings themselves, but there's quite a bit of fields that are virus free. Any fields that had virus load did not react well at all with the heat. The virus free stuff, it did very well in the heat. It produced better than expected yields. So overall, for some of the major aroma varieties, we're slightly average to slightly lower yields. On the alpha and the oils on these same varieties, we're probably slightly higher alpha and slightly higher oil yields. If we get into just a little update on the HBC YCR varieties for us, it was very variable by region. The early pick varieties were average to slightly higher on yields. The mid varieties were average to slightly lower yields. For us, we grow these varieties in all 3 states, and even within the states, there's regions within the states. So for us, those varieties did what we expected. So no major concerns for us there. We will on some alpha here, see how page down is gonna. So a couple pictures to point out as I was talking here. This is a field that you see on your right-hand side. Don't have a picture of it, but this field is one of the fields that we're talking that got singed pretty hard by that heat, that 117-degree heat. Well, as the plant shut down at the top, you could just see the plant wanted to continue to grow. You could see where just the sidearm development or at the base of the plant itself, it just wants to produce hops. Problem with this is you can't pick up the hops off the ground. So there was quite a bit of fields that we saw this. I'd never seen this before in my life, where you could see just hops growing on the ground. Picture in the middle, what you see is I take that picture and there's more work to be done. And I take that picture as this cone was developing on those days of the extreme heat. So, and cones actually shut off the exact same way the plant shut off. Any development of that cone got shut off. And as the plant continued to grow and continue to receive nutrients, that plant is very resilient. That cone continued to grow. Again, this is an extreme picture, but just want to paint a picture for people that don't make their way up to the Yakima Valley and see some of what did happen this year. The picture on the left is a Cascade field. You can see it, just cones top to bottom, trying to get a picture there through the middle. So like I said before, very surprised at the end of the year. I'm very happy with how the end outcome of harvest came about. It's from those days of the extreme heat, there's a lot of sleepless nights, and at the end it proved to Mother Nature on our side proved to help out the growers on within the hop growing region. So one more, we were asked to provide a kind of an update on what we had seen as far as what we're seeing out of Germany. Steve Carpenter forwarded me this. Thank you, Steve. And just a little bit of update. I don't at this point in time, I don't pay much attention to the European market and the German market, but you can see there, again, maturity was delayed, harvest 7 to 10 days. And there was quite a bit of picking, as we put it here in Washington with some growers. You don't pick until October, you pick until September 34th. So it's sounds like they were a little bit in that same scenario with them. As most of the varieties above average, alpha content higher than average, Hercules about an 18%. Quality is generally good from what we are getting out of the European regions. We're taking a look at highlights out of the UK. Acreage was down. That was very intentional, but yields were average. Estimated total crop out of the UK, I guess at this point it's not estimated, is right around 2 million pounds. Overall quality is very good. And just the last update from my side is just on our alpha market within the US. We've got same 3 growing regions. I think the yield was average for Washington on the alpha varieties, but the concentration was below average from what we were expected in some of the CTZ varieties. In Idaho, on the other hand, on some of the alpha varieties, we've seen above average yields and more than above average alpha percentages. So I know that I only had 10-15 minutes, so excuse me for my problems with Zoom there, and that's all I had. So if anybody has any questions, haven't seen any come through the Q&A. So
Yeah, folks, if you have any questions, please drop them into the Q&A box.
And again, apologies.
Oh, no need, Pete. No need for apologies. It happens.
Yeah. We're all winging it.
So hopefully it was useful for you, Doug. If anything else we need to improve into the future, just kind of let us know, and we'll be more prepared into the future. Anything that the Pacific Northwest Charter is needing from us, we're more than willing. Very happy. I've been to many of these charters and meetings over the last 20 years, so more than happy to provide any assistance wherever is needed.
There is one question. Sorry to interrupt.
Right.
Leslie wants to know: is there any concern for smoke taint?
There's always a concern with smoke taint with the amount of smoke we had this last year. So we do have lots that are with some smoke taint. Good to report is that it's lower than the previous year by a good chunk. And we're dealing with it as with anything. Those lots that go through our sensory program, we've got very robust, and we're always checking as the lots come in, and if at any time any of our panelists perceive any smoke coming out of any any sample or any person doing a selection perceives any smoke out of any of those lots, it gets recirculated, and we do additional testing, additional sampling. We do not put any of those lots into craft sales or type 90 sales. We try and find other solutions for those hops. So our end goal is that any lots with smoke taint do not get to the brewer's hands. That's our overreaching goal. It has been last year with what we learned, and it still continues to be that.
There's just one more question from
Sure.
Carl. He's wondering, any numbers on total pounds harvested and compared to last year?
Well, I can tell you for our numbers out of our company, we probably came in above average to total above average for what we were expecting. And I think as the Hop Growers of America continues to finalize bale counts and everything else, I think the last numbers will come out of Hop Growers of America. But in our case, we came right to where we were needing to come in. Like I said, we're thankful at the end where we ended up.
Is that it for the questions, Christina, as far as you can see?
Yes, there's no more questions.
Okay. Thank you very much, Pete. Much appreciated.
Not a problem, Doug. Nice to see you.
Yep. Look forward to having a beer in person with you next time. All right. Share my screen again. Brings us over to Mr. Leon Fife. There you are.
Sorry, I lost you.
He's back. Leon
I'm
is back.
I think I'm back. I kept on, I don't know. I think it was maybe just getting moved around from being a presenter to not, but all right.
So I've got a few slides for you, Leon. You just tell me when you're ready and when you want me to move on.
No, that sounds good. Yeah, we can go ahead and go to the first slide. I mean, I'll be able to make up some time for us here. Not a lot of changes, but financially, but overall, we're in a great spot. Let's see, spring presentation presented that we were right around 117,000 at start of year. We're finishing right now, year to date, we're at 122 and change in the bank. Kind of how we got there. Obviously, dues and incomes, we're at 6,300 for the year on that. That's probably expect to see about another 1,500 come in on that. We're usually right around $8,000 per year. Most of that comes in the first half of the year. So we're a little bit more expected before the end of the year on that. But sponsorship income, $1,100. And then investments, we've done really well with investments the last few years. It's been a little bit more up and down lately, but net, we're still positive, which is great, putting us at a total income year to date at 14,000. Real good spot to be. Overall costs, taxes, insurance stuff, and then paid out. I closed out 2 of the scholarships, which came to 5,000. So expenses out $9,000, leaving us with a net profit of just shy of 5. That's where we get the growth this year financially. So we're in a really good spot. This is great because it helps us pay for the meetings when we do have them in person, because those can tend to cost us upwards in the range of $30,000. Obviously we make that money back and then usually some extra, but not always. And so either way, we're a very healthy district, and when we get to Nick and the scholarships, he'll get into that, but it allows us to fund multiple scholarships every year, as well as give to some of those endowments with Oregon State and anywhere else we decide to invest into. So for the future of brewing. So next slide, Doug. All right. Yeah, this is just a year-over-year tracker. So obviously you can see, for the last 11, 12 years, we continue to grow as a district, but we also get smarter financially about how we pay for and how, in the prevention of losing money on the meetings. At the end of the day, we want to make sure that we're at least coming out net neutral or making some money to continue to fund investment back into the district. But yeah, so 117 at the beginning of the year, we're at 122 now. I expect us to, depending on how the market treats us this last quarter, I expect us to hold pretty steady. You can see we are starting to taper off. And I'm not sure, probably a lot of that really over this last year and a half, almost 2 years now with COVID. Obviously, we're not bringing in the money that we used to in terms of generating meeting income. So yeah, next slide, Doug. Overall district membership, we have been down about 60 to 80 members over the last few years. Coming off that 2018 high of, I think we were like right around 530, if I remember right. Currently at 431, holding pretty steady. And depending on if this, I meant to put a slide together actually listing all the names of the new members over the last several months. I didn't get to it, but I will do, especially if we stay virtual, I will do that, because the great thing about getting together in person was we could, put everyone up on the stage and, raise their right hand and say the oath. And that was always a whole lot of fun to kind of harass a little bit and in good nature. But I do know that we had 6 new members as of last month that had joined. I don't know how many people had lapsed though. So I think there's some opportunity for us on the membership side, just analytically to, and this did get brought up as a question in the spring, who's coming and going and how much is COVID impacting that? I don't think we really have a lot of visibility into that quite yet, but we are holding pretty stable in terms of our membership base, which is great. And that's what I have. Any questions? And I'm glad we're virtual because I have the unfortunate work of being at the Kona Brewery in Hawaii, which is technically, Northwest District, right? Is that right, Doug?
As far as I know, yeah, I think we embraced Kona or Hawaii and Alaska. So
yeah.
Future meeting in Hawaii, is that what I'm hearing?
That works for me. I'm sure there'd be no complaints.
Yeah, Leon's working on accommodations and where to hold the Friday night party. So Nick had a couple of comments about membership information too that he brought up during our kind of officer pre-meeting. I see Nick is on video there. Do you want to unmute yourself, Nick?
Yeah, I've been tracking the renewals, and last year we had obviously a challenging environment for most people, and we had quite a few people who were members who didn't renew. The good news is that this year we're pretty much parallel with last year on renewals, which means that almost everybody is renewing this year, where last year we had that drop off. So we should see a steady uptick, and it's reflected in the numbers that Leon just showed, that we have gained some members this year because everybody who was due to renew has done. We're currently quarter on quarter. Last year we had 130 people renew in the first quarter. This year 127, 98 in the second quarter last year, 93 for second quarter this year, 105 last year for third quarter, and 107 this year. So we're seeing a slight uptick, and we had 114 renewals in quarter 4 last year. Obviously we don't know how many that's going to be, but I'm expecting that we will be a slight increase in that number from the people I see on the list who are due to renew. So I think we should be seeing a good stability in existing members, and the new members coming in mean we're once again going to be a growing district, which is fantastic. Obviously, with those membership numbers, we are in a good, as Leon said, a good strong financial position. So with that in mind, we go on to scholarships. We like to give away some of the money that we have.
Hold on one moment, Nick. Sorry, there was a question from Carl for Nick. Do we have any current yearly commitments to the OSU Foundation?
That I'm not sure about. I don't think we've got anything outstanding. Leon, do you know if we've got anything?
Yeah, we do. I mean, there's the endowment we set up is generating sort of not tuition, but scholarship money for an award. And that's usually coordinated with the vice president and folks at OSU about announcing or selecting and announcing who that person is from among the OSU population. I don't know that that's happened yet this year, or did?
No, I think we announced one at the last meeting in the spring, but I don't think we have anything outstanding at the moment. So we should have another announcement for that in the spring meeting.
Yeah, it's up until this point, it's happened once a year. It's been a once a year award.
Yeah, I think we try and keep it so that we're announcing the OSU candidates in the spring and the MBAA candidates in the fall at the meetings. With scholarships for MBAA, we get anywhere from 2 to 15 applications each year. I would encourage people to get your applications in, because this is a pretty valuable award. Hopefully, once again, we'll be sending people to in-person meetings. They've started up again with the courses in Madison, so people can get their awards and go and get a much more valuable, I think, experience going to do the in-person. That being said, we've got 2 candidates that we couldn't decide which one to pick this year. So we're going to take this strong financial position, reinvest, and send 2 candidates for scholarships. And those 2 lucky people are Greg Brandt from Iron Goat Brewing and Jeff Huneman from Fremont Brewing. So congratulations to you. We will be arranging for your scholarship and get your courses booked for next fall.
Just one thing. Joe Casey had chimed in. A total of $25,000 commitment to OSU has been satisfied. No more mandatory financial obligations.
Thanks, Joe.
Great.
All right. Yeah. So we will be relaunching the scholarship application period. Generally, that happens right after the spring meeting. So if you're interested in pursuing that, keep your eyes on updates from the district. Probably in end of May, beginning of June next year, and work on those applications, and we look forward to sending some more folks next year.
One thing that I would just reiterate that we take into account on scholarships is people's involvement in the district, how much they give back and how much they contribute to the district. So I would encourage people to get involved, either as members of the technical committee or in some other way with the Northwest District, in order to up your chances of getting a scholarship.
And Robert will talk a little bit about involvement with the technical committee a little bit later on. But yeah, we are a volunteer organization, and rely on people coming forward and sharing their expertise and contributing their energy. So like all these folks here today, I appreciate it. Anything else, Nick? On the scholarship side?
That is it for me.
Okay. Move down the list here to Mr. Joe Casey, and he's going to update us about some things he's become aware of with the Board of Governors. And I've got your slides here, Joe. Do you want me to advance through these, or do you have?
Yeah, why don't you just share your screen? I'll just let you know when to advance.
Okay.
Okay, so hello everybody. So I'm Joe Casey. I work with Anheuser-Busch, part of the raw materials group. I'm based here in Portland, Oregon, but do a lot of work with folks in St. Louis. So my role here in Master Brewers is a Board of Governor representative, and for the new members who don't know what that position is, that's essentially the liaison between the districts and the national group. Each district has one governor representative that is part of the Board of Governors, and we work with national leadership and districts to kind of pick the direction the organization is going to go, and then to make sure that we're going that direction and keep everything on track. So that's what I'm doing for our group. Board of Governors meets at least twice a year, usually twice a year. One of those meetings is typically usually in person at the annual meeting. That's not happening this year. We did just have a recent virtual meeting, and so I'll go through a few of the updates we have. From a financial perspective, for all of Master Brewers, I'll let you know, first off, things are going pretty well, and because of that, there will be no dues increase for next year. Costs will remain the same: $149 for professional members, $44 for students, $20 for retirees, and $0 for honorary members, which are usually like past officers, national, and things of that nature. So as I mentioned, overall, the district the group is doing fairly well, mostly because the loss of membership hasn't been as bad as it was budgeted to be. So that's very good news. And it kind of trends with the graph of new members that we saw for our own district. We're starting to see that rebound at the national level as well. Numbers were over about 5,000 at one point, and then we've dipped down to a little bit over 4,000, but they're climbing again. So that's all good news. Other positive financial things that we've had happen this year, book sales have been increased, so that's good. There's a little bit of money coming in there. The packaging course generated $15,000 of revenue, so that's good. And overall, through August, we're about $220,000 favorable to budget. I apologize, I don't have the actual budget number. I had a screenshot of that from the meeting and it's disappeared, but overall, the message is that we're doing good and we're ahead of the game at this point through August. So next slide. Okay, so one of the things that the national group is doing, they have a district health task force, and taking a look at the pros and cons of what's happening at the district level and which ones are doing well and which ones need some improvement, and best practice sharing, and how to overall strengthen those the districts as well as in the total organization. So so they're working on publishing some best practices for various types of things. One of those is for new membership receiving or new membership application. Leon pointed out that we typically in our district we have the new members brought up on the stage and they announce themselves, and we have that process where they're officially welcomed in front of everybody, and not everybody does things like that. So I think that's an example of something we do that makes it clear that there are new members and welcomes them to the group. So things of that nature. Also, contacting best practices for contacting recently departed members that have lapsed membership, and why did they do that? Are they coming back? That type of thing. There's also some training videos that'll be coming out for district officers, largely around some administrative things and some HR stuff, like what do you need to do to remove an officer, things of that nature. I don't know that that's ever happened, but there needs to be rules to play by if that does occur. So getting that out there and publicized. Also, Master Brewers it's a nonprofit organization, and a lot of the districts do fundraisers, some of which raise pretty substantial amounts of money. So there are some legalities involved with that as a nonprofit. So getting some word out, some guidance on sort of the do's and don'ts that you're allowed to do in fundraising in order to keep our status as nonprofit intact. Another thing that's come up, I didn't realize this, but in our bylaws, there's actually the national bylaws. There's a stipulation in there that the maximum officer role should be two years at the district level. District Northwest abides by that. Our officer terms are set up on 2 years, and this is per role. Not all of the districts have done that, and some districts have had sort of the same leadership for a really long period of time. And you can make different arguments about whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. There's some stability, consistency. On the downside, you could say in some cases there might be a little bit of stagnation as well. So they're taking a look at how to phrase that message and try to breathe some life back into some of the districts that haven't been as vibrant, that have had certain officers in place for very long periods of time, and try to get some fresh blood going. Also looking at some best practices for meetings. I think our district, I think, is a really shining example of what the national group is trying to do. As any of you who've been a part of our district for a while, you know that we've got a very successful district, very prosperous and very open and sharing and very knowledgeable. Large technical meetings, sharing knowledge, attract a lot of people, a lot of vendors here in the Northwest as well, so a lot of information sharing. Not all of the districts have that. Some districts are more social oriented, where they do golf outings on a frequency basis, or meet many times a year, that type of thing. So the national group is looking at some recommendations on how often groups should be doing. I don't think they're mandates, but they're just recommendations. As I mentioned, our district is very strong. I think we have a rock solid structure, and I don't see any changes, and I certainly wouldn't recommend any at this time. So, next slide. Okay, and one other major topic that's been discussed at the board level, as a lot of people know, there's been a variety of there's been some things going on in the press that have not been very good to hear about. Certainly not to experience for people involved in that. So the Master Brewers, actually prior to all that, had been working for a number of years on sort of strengthening our position on diversity and equity and inclusion, and a lot of times that's just abbreviated DEI. I think I put them out there in the wrong order, but DEI is the abbreviation people are using. And so there's in conjunction with education and whatnot, there's some efforts going on with training. How can we make our members aware of how they can deal with certain situations so that they don't devolve into something that they shouldn't be? How do you train people to deal with those things safely? The whole idea, if you see something, say something, and take an active part in protecting our environment and our fellow coworkers. So there's also some work on strengthening the reporting system so that people, if there is something to report, which would be unfortunate, but make that easy and appropriate and prompt for anybody that has to go through that. And as well, and part of that is just to make sure there's going to be a lot more emphasis on making sure that our code of conduct is really kind of front and center on district meetings, national meetings, and just make sure that that is out there all the time so that people see it and it just becomes sort of part of what we do and how we treat ourselves and others. So I'm not going to get into a whole lot more. I think Susan's coming up after me, and she's been leading up this effort. So I think that is it for me. I see a couple question chats. Any questions for Board Governor? Okay, well, I'll be around on the meeting. So if something comes up between now and the end, shoot me a chat or an email or what have you, and I'll help you out however I can. And thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Joe. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Good to see you back in the fold on the headphone set. So as Joe mentioned, Susan Welch, who is a member of our district, serves on the National DEI Committee, and she's graciously agreed to spend some time with us today and kind of bring us up to speed and let us know kind of what's been happening with that committee. There's been some new material that's been published and is available by way of the MBAA website, and maybe a little look into the future about what might be around the corner and what kind of efforts are being worked on as we speak. So Susan, I think, probably has some of her slides on her machine to share.
I do. Can you hear me?
I can hear you,
There.
and I can see your slides.
Yay!
All
That's
right.
great. I just want to make sure I get myself in the right view here. All right, there is that big screen so you don't see all my scribbles and stuff.
You're
Yeah,
live.
thanks. Great. Okay, well, thanks, Doug, and thanks, Joe. I'm really happy to be here a year and a half into our work and having the chance to report with you guys. As some of you know, I hope, PNW is my home district, and I've always been impressed by sort of the leading edgeness of this district, you know, traveling around and seeing a lot of the other districts. We really do set a lot of examples. And I would say that the work that was done around the code of conduct and expected behavior a couple of years ago out of this district really provided me some direction this year as we tried to up the game for the national conference. So just wanted to throw kudos out to the district in general and the leadership that comes out of PNW. It's really appreciated. So there's that. I thought I would just spend a few minutes. I know you guys have a super full agenda. So really what this is today is a snapshot of where we're at, where we've come from a little bit, where we're at right now, ways that you can get involved or at least follow what we are doing, resources that we're offering, how you might see MBAA hopefully evolving towards more diversity through equity and inclusion in the coming months. I have to say it's a challenge because nobody, you know, we're all volunteers. we're brewers and maltsters and hopsters and, you know, equipment people. None of us on my committee are flat out DEI or human resource experts. And so we're fumbling our way along, but it has been incredibly heartening. And I think what I've learned is that it is just that. I mean, maybe it's kind of like democracy, right? Like it's an aspiration, not a reality. We're trying to become more inclusive. Many of us most of us fully acknowledge that brewing is has not been terribly diverse. And so we're trying to tackle it. Not always beautifully, not always linearly, but here we go. And so now a year and a half into this, where is the DEI committee? Actually, we're still a task force. And as of, I think, the BOG meeting in Cleveland, it looks like we will be made a full committee. We're certainly behaving as if we are a full committee. We will also be doing a call for volunteers that I'll talk about in a second. So our three objectives for the DEI committee within MBAA are, first of all, addressing DEI within the MBAA. You know, as an organization itself, do our documents reflect inclusivity? Does the way that we talk with one another reflect that? What more can we do at the district level to, you know, bring members in that see us as an inclusive and welcoming place? So the first sort of bucket of work has been around addressing DEI within the MBAA itself as a structure, both at the national and the district and the virtual levels. And to that, I didn't actually know, in case it, I didn't know that my slides were progressive like this. So I'm sitting here pushing the buttons, wondering what's going to pop up next. So I apologize for that. especially because I wanted to go over the value statement before I hit the other points. But I'm going to save it for last. So on this sheet, so keep that on the back burner. This first subcommittee around addressing DEI within the MBAA has spent time in the last couple of months reviewing our governing documents to change language around pronouns and to make sure that nothing is exclusive or limited to a certain group of people. It was pretty easy. It's pretty straightforward, but it was something that we had to do. As part of that, we also added the value statement, the DEI value statement, which was recently approved by the BOG, and I'll share that in a minute. Largely not exactly in response to, but certainly super boosted by the events of this spring around harassment and misogyny within the MBAA. We reviewed our expected behavior and code of conduct. We now have a new anonymous reporting app. And if you go to the website, you can see the app and you can download it. It's called Lighthouse. It's one piece of our sort of new and refreshed way for members to report breaches of the code of conduct in real time, either victims or bystanders. It's very user-friendly. As part of that, we're also reviewing the code of conduct itself and the sort of what happens part, after you've reported, to be very, very clear what that process is from the moment you make a report until closure. Personally, I think that clarity is huge. I mean, I know in my own experience, if there were ever times that I would have reported something, yes, I know that there is a phone number that I can call, but what happens afterward, and do I feel safe and protected in that process? And it wasn't always clear that that was the case. So we're working on that. And you'll see a lot of that upgraded at the national level in the upcoming conference. Speaking of the Cleveland conference, aside from much more attention being paid to clarity with expected behavior and code of conduct and the anonymous reporting, we're also doing a lot of proactive things at the conference to raise awareness around culture, acceptable behavior, how we communicate with one another, the role of alcohol as we come together as a Master Brewers community is something that we really need to take seriously. And we've done this, I think, by trying to do some proactive mitigation, having a lot more non-alcoholic beverages available, leadership bystander training. The DEI committee, a little commercial here, we're going to be doing a booth takeover so that people can come and learn more about what we're doing and how we're doing it and where there are opportunities for volunteers. Mallet will be hitting DEI and expected behavior pretty hard in his opening comments. The opening speaker is Garrett Oliver, and the closing speaker is Dr. J. So, we are, I don't know whether this massive attention to sort of the DEI effort will continue every year, but we really do need to raise awareness and sort of raise the bar around the look and feel of our meetings, starting with the national and hopefully spreading throughout districts. Next for this bucket of work is a policies and practice review. Everything that, from how we get volunteers involved in committees to the pipeline for national leadership, and how the technical committee, for example, solicits in content for the national conference. Joe just spoke a bit about the district health committee, and I see, and I think they do as well, a lot of interface between district health and DEI to sort of put forward best practices and guidelines. My committee, and I'll talk about this in a minute, is very, very focused on providing tools and resources for districts around membership outreach through a kind of a DEI lens, more focus on underrepresented brewers and breweries in terms of our membership on a district by district basis. So finally, we get to the DEI value statement. It became apparent at some point this year that we really needed a DEI value statement to sort of put a stake in the ground in terms of where we were going, what value do we put behind building true diversity, why it's important, how we intend to approach it, and what the efforts look like now. So I'll just set aside a second here for people want to glance at that. I can also send it later. This is our DEI value statement. It will become part of the governing documents of the organization. And it's sort of our lodestar, I would say, as a committee, for sure. And it also, I think, created a lot of alignment between the executive committee and the DEI committee, so that, you know, there is agreement about why it's important and what steps need to happen to make real progress. Oh, there's the anonymous reporting icon in case any of you are attending the conference and want to get this installed and give it a spin before going to the conference. All right, the second bucket is providing DEI resources to membership. This is headed up by Devo Buckingham. She's the chairperson of this committee, this subcommittee. We are launching a community of practice. It's a little bit delayed. It looks like it's going to happen in January, but we're super excited about it. We've got a great list of people who are interested and willing in being sort of part of the launch group. We've got 4 or 5 moderators. If any of you are familiar with for example, the community of practice around safety, it will look and feel quite a lot like that. This group will have residents on the webpage. There will be a chat room involved, like, you know, email threads, that kind of thing. But we'll also have like a book club and possibly some webinars within the community of practice. There may be content coming out of the community of practice for the technical committee. Super, super excited about this. This is being led by Erica Choi of the brewery. DEI perspectives. This is something that we've launched recently. It's very similar to the safety toolbox papers. We call it DEI perspectives. The first one is out, and it's just around the basics of DEI. The next one is on hiring and retention, and we plan to launch about 6 of these a year. Very basic, very fundamental papers with definitions and resources. Webinars, you will see a series of DEI webinars. We've done 2 already. One was on mental health in the brew house, and the other was on the basics of DEI. We will have an upstander bystander one coming up soon. And like I said, you can expect more of those. District meetings, we love to do outreach through district meetings to provide any content that we can. We try to align with the perspectives papers and with topics that the COP are dealing with. An example of this would be Deschutes Brewery has given a presentation on its content through us to a couple districts. I think Veronica did it with the District Northwest one meeting ago. Upcoming conference, there is a live session on DEI, on hiring and retention. There is a workshop. No, I'm sorry. The technical session is 3 papers on DEI. One is on a brewery in South LA that is an incubator in a sort of urban area. The other is Odell's presenting on their resource groups. And the third is Ren Navarro, our subject matter expert. There will be a workshop on hiring and retention in the virtual part. Those are the 2 highlights in terms of content. Website resources, I invite you to take a look at the new website DEI page. It's in the making. I don't think it's terribly beautiful or functional right now, but it will be. There it is. You see it has a variety of buttons at the bottom that don't have much behind them quite yet, but we're working on it. And quickly outreach to the wider brewing community. We have been part of the leadership group amongst a variety of trade organizations that have come together to create the Brew Coalition. which is, I've got a slide on it that I want to get to. There it is. To drive industry-wide adoption of evidence-based best practices for preventing discrimination, harassment, and violence within the brewing industry. So, you know, we worked long and hard on that, on the sentence itself. It's not, we actually have organized ourselves to find what actually evidentially works to prevent discrimination, harassment, and violence. So this is not about inclusivity per se or diversity. This is about addressing head on as an industry with a coalition of associations and groups that rarely have ever come before together before. I mean, maybe never in such a way to take this problem head on, because it is completely unacceptable. And this group has been working really diligently and quickly and at a very high level to come up with a format. You should be seeing a website that is specific to this in coming months. So stay tuned on the Brew Coalition. Let's see. Membership growth through DEI lens. I did talk about that. This subcommittee, which is led by Chris Davison of Wolfridge, is also going to be coming up with a strategic plan in coordination with the district health committee around membership growth through a DEI lens, which I spoke about. And hopefully part of that will be learning from and communicating with district leadership, because in my humble opinion, the health and the vibrancy of the master brewers resides 99% within the districts. And, oh man, let's see. Oh, here we are, the end. There we go. So we're busy. We want your involvement. If you want to learn more, if you want to make a comment about anything we're doing, positive, negative, or just provocative, you know, please let me know. We are fumbling our way forward. We've got a great committee. We will be looking for more volunteers starting at the national conference. There's a lot of good things to do, and it takes many, many hands.
Any questions for Susan? Susan, are you able to see the chat thread?
So use the Q&A. There's a Q&A.
Q&A, sorry.
Yeah, the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen should open that box up and you should be able to see. There's no questions in it right now, but if anybody has questions, please feel free to drop them into the Q&A. You can also drop in anonymous questions if you are hesitant on having your name attached to a question.
Susan, are you comfortable sharing your email address in the?
Sure. Yes. I'm sorry, I don't have it there. It's Susan at proximitymalt.com. Or, yeah, some of you might have it as SWELCH111@gmail. Both are fine.
I really appreciate you sharing with us, Susan. We're really privileged in our district to have such a front row seat. What's some of the projects that are being worked on at the high level at the national, kind of helps keep us more aware of what's going on in the wider world. So thank you very much for what you do and for keeping us up to speed.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. It's been great.
I'm trying to share my screen here again. Actually, Susan, can you stop sharing yours, please?
Yeah, let's see. Stop. Okay.
Right,
there.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Let's see if my slides move on here. I will attempt to race across the finish line here, and the technical folks are chomping at the bit. They're ready to get started here. Having some difficulty moving my screen forward. I'll do this from memory. So not always the best policy. So two things. One being the upcoming meeting. So we, as an executive committee, have signed on for a spring meeting in person. Is what we're planning at this point in Hood River. That is May 20th and 21st. Christina can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I've finally got those dates imprinted.
Those are correct.
Okay, thank you. So we're, at this point fully planning for an in-person meeting, and hope the circumstances at large will permit us to do that. But that will be a welcome change, and it's wonderful to get back together with everyone and see if we can remember how to do that. The other thing which I just mentioned, but I'll, as far as like going into in depth on it, we'll leave that with Robert and his talking about the technical committee. But we are in the spring is the time whenever we're rotating seats on the executive committee, and which means we will be bringing in a new technical chair to take over for Robert as everyone moves one step forward. So we'll let him talk about that a little more, but just heads up that will be that nomination will be happening at the spring meeting. I'm going to try stop sharing and then resharing and see if I can get this thing to move forward, because there are a couple slides for Robert.
I might be able to share from my screen, Doug, and maybe that would.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know what's going on there, but here you go. All right.
Can you see that?
Yeah, thank you very much. So at this point, we are wrapped up with the member meeting. And I don't know, Christina, do you have any parting words for us, or just kind of
No, I'm
jumping back on at the end with the happy hour
yeah.
option?
Yeah, for those of you who joined us later on than when we started, we will do a happy hour at the end of this, so probably closer to 4:30, 4:45. So at that point, we'll grab a beer, and anyone who wants to stay on, we'll move you over so we can see your faces. Yeah, that's all I have. I'm excited to get back in person next spring.
Thank you very much. So go ahead, Robert. The stage is yours.
All right. Can y'all hear me okay, Doug?
Yes.
Great. So my name is Robert Fulweiler. I'm the technical director at Fremont Brewing, and I'm the Master Brewers Northwest technical chair. This is my third meeting, and I'll be able to put on one final one in the spring. So we've got a awesome technical program for you today. We got 4 rock star folks, a couple from that are right from our district. As you can see, we're definitely we're quite a bit behind schedule here, but this is going to be the order that we're following. So Lindsay Barr from Draft Lab is going to talk to us about sensory and kind of how we describe beer. Campbell from Freeman OSU is going to talk about research he's done on barley varieties and how that impacts flavor. Trent from Mad Tree Brewing is going to give us a rundown of sensory modeling that he's worked on, predicting sensory outcomes based on previous experiments. And then Vern Johnson at Deschutes is going to kind of walk us through pilot brewing at Deschutes Brewery, and what the pilot brew house looks like, and how they come up with new beers there. So there's a lot of great content. I hope you stick around. I just did want to thank before we got started, thank folks that helped us out this time. So we've got a group of volunteers that that meet a few times before the meeting and kind of talk about what kind of content we want to put on, and use our network of contacts to get great folks to come and speak to you. So we're always looking for more people to get involved in the committee. So if you are interested, please send me an email. My email address is on the screen right there. But again, thanks to these folks that have helped us out this time. And then finally, like I mentioned, the officers group is turning over after the next meeting. So we are looking for someone to be the next technical chair. So if you are interested, please let me know. Or if you would like to nominate someone for us to reach out to, same thing, please get a hold of me or anyone of the MBAA officers. All right, so we are going to move into Lindsay Barr's presentation.
Hello, everyone. It's good to see you. Or at least it's good to see you, Robert.
You can see me, right?
Yeah.
Let me, Lindsay, let me introduce you real quick.
Sure.
While I get your slides ready. So Lindsay is the CSO and founding partner of Draft Lab Sensory Software, where she works with food and beverage companies to apply tasting data to inform product development and quality control. Lindsay got her start at New Belgium Brewing Company as the Sensory and Consumer Research Specialist. For 5 years, she served as the chair of the ASBC Sensory Committee, where she co-authored 7 new globally adopted sensory evaluation techniques. She holds a BS in biochemistry and molecular biology from the University of New Mexico and a master's in food science and technology from the University of California, Davis. With Draft Lab, she's published numerous industry standard lexicons, including the beer flavor map, and is continuing to develop tools that make the world a more delicious place. So thanks, Lindsay. We're excited to hear your presentation.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'll go ahead and share my screen and pull this thing up. All right, Robert, thanks for the invite, and thank you, Pacific Northwest District, for having me. Again, of course, I'm bummed that I'm not along with you guys, but I'll hopefully get to see many of you at the annual meeting next week. So let's have beers then. So I'm going to just talk about descriptive sensory analysis, and it's a relatively broad topic. When Robert asked me to talk about describing beer, I'm like, where am I going to go with this? So I'm going to play some of the hits, really, like just kind of talk about some of the basics with how we can get value out of just describing our products, and how to basically start with getting really solid descriptions for our products and how they can be utilized. I'll also touch on the beer flavor map, of course, a little bit, and some of the best practices for training a panel to do this kind of work, regardless of the amount of resources that you have at your brewery. So let's go ahead and get started. So I like to think about sensory science as being the compilation of 2 different areas. So one area of sensory science is interested in describing the person, describing the perception of the product that we are tasting. The other side of sensory is the more objective side. So that is concerned about describing the characteristics of the product itself. And so your experience of liking, we are all pretty good at describing that. We've been taught, and it's pretty natural for us to describe our hedonic sensations, so the things that we like and how we perceive something. So we are quite capable of saying if we like something or dislike something, and that is our subjective experience. The factors, though, that influence our liking are those objective experiences that are a little bit harder to identify and harder to standardize. But these are the experiences and the attributes that we are concerned about measuring. And really the reason why we are concerned about measuring this is that, you can have subjective responses on one hand, but if you don't know the attributes that are driving liking, then you really don't have much of a business. On the flip side, if you are capable of objectively describing every product, but really don't know if it has a good consumer impact, that's equally as useless, right? So we kind of have to combine these two things so that we can do really intentional product development and pinpointed product development using common lexicons. So sensory science, to sum it up, kind of involves studying the factors that influence liking, and both of these things can be measured. And every business is interested in creating new products. So we work with hundreds of different companies throughout many different categories. And one of the things that I've noted is consistent regardless of where you are in the development of your business, your food and beverage business, is that we all care about what people like, and we are all concerned about getting the right product to market and delighting our consumers. Not every brewery or not every company that I work with is all that concerned about doing QC, kind of doing the regular analysis. It's relatively uncommon, but it is true that some companies are really just making one-off beers pretty consistently. So a lot of times what I've noticed is that the one thing that really every business needs is to understand what their consumers are liking and to be able to identify the specific characteristics that drive that liking. And that is something that runs through every single food and beverage business, because we are selling flavor after all. And so how you go about describing these products can look like a whole bunch of different ways. It can look like soliciting consumer feedback just from the other side of the bar. It can also look like a more analytical type sensory panel where we are describing products using a specified language. And so let's talk about the importance of these product descriptions. Again, this is really the baseline that every business is going to use to measure their success creating their products. So product descriptions serve as the basis for you to decide what to make and how to make it. I remember back in the day when I worked in production that I kept having this conversation with our brewmasters around really identifying the product that they wanted to make in clear sensory terms so that we could measure success and be able to give feedback back to our brewers. And a lot of times I heard was like, oh, well, you know, we just kind of like make the beer and like we hope that it's going to kind of turn out nicely. I'm like, I don't believe that. And so I sat down with one of our brewers and while they were writing a recipe, and I'm like, okay, well, why did you choose to add caramel malt? Why did you choose to add Saaz hops? Why did you choose a target of 20 BUs? All of those choices in creating that product had an intended sensory outcome. Oh, we chose some caramel malt because we want a little bit more sweetness and a little bit more body. We chose Saaz hops because we wanted a little bit of herbaceous aromatics and spicy aromas. And, you know, we chose the 20 BUs because we didn't want a lot of bitterness and we wanted a clean finish. All of the things that you're doing when making your products have a sensory outcome. And so it is a valid first step to just write those things down, write down what it is that you're intending to do so that you can accurately measure your success when you've created that product. And that's not to kind of beat you down if you don't hit that target, but it's to more intentionally align the next derivation of the product closer to the goal. And so it's the basis to help you decide what to make and how to make it. So the what, we can answer, what do we internally, or what do my consumers like and why do they like that? And then the how thing. So what raw materials should I source? What kind of production parameters should I hit, like in my example? And so this gives you a measuring stick to be able to determine if you are close to your target, and it can just help you become a better brewer. So it answers, did we hit our target for this product? And so let's talk about the importance of a common lexicon. Any sensory program is going to start with what is the language that you're speaking to describe your products, given that like the first step of doing any kind of sensory testing is to understand what is the target that you're going after. And so this is, you know, when you think about this entire supply chain, a common lexicon can really unify all elements of that supply chain and help to elevate the entire industry by being able to pinpoint the things that we want as brewers, that if we can communicate that to our raw materials producers, they can better serve us and we will buy more product. If brewers can understand what our consumers like, we can then internalize that and work as an ecosystem to elevate our product and make better products. And that starts with a unified lexicon. So some of the questions that we are asking as brewers is, hey, consumers, what is it that we should make? Of course, we're not going to ask in those terms. We have sensory methods to do that, but you get the point. And consumers will feed back to us, we like X, Y, and Z, so that we can then tell our raw materials producers, we need X, Y, and Z flavors. We need grassy, we need nutty, we need sweet aromatics. And then our raw materials producers can go back to us and say, okay, we have a product for you that's going to hit these targets. So you can see how when we are all speaking the same language, we can really get a good understanding of whether or not we are consistently meeting the target that our consumers want. And we will help our materials producers deliver for us the thing that is intended. And it all starts right here. It all starts with the unified lexicons. And this is one example of a unified lexicon, which is the beer flavor map that was created in 2016. And this is a standardized lexicon that uses approachable language that has been cross-referenced through various other flavor sources in order to help the user to identify more specifically what are the attributes that are in the product so that we can measure those more clearly. And so let's talk about utilizing the lexicon, by determining our target descriptions. So step one in any kind of product development or QC type testing is we need to define our target. And the analogy that he uses is analytical specifications. Nobody is going to make a product, a beer, without determining what ABV you're going to be shooting for. So you generally know, all right, my target is 6% ABV plus or minus 0.2% wiggle room for legal purposes. And that is the target specification. We can do the same thing using language, using flavor, to determine what is our flavor target. And the really great thing about flavor is it's really accessible for every single business. You may not have an Anton Par, you may not even have a microscope, but you do have palettes and you do have the ability to more accurately describe your products. And so step one is to create a sensory description. This helps give you a target to measure your samples against. And in product development, it can be used to determine when you have the right prototype or what kind of changes should be made to hit that target description. In quality control, it can be used to determine when a sample falls outside of those acceptable limits. If you have a really good understanding of what are the flavor characteristics that make your beer that beer, you can know when you are not hitting that as well. And so the method that I like to use and the method that is integrated into our software is the description test. And this uses a couple of different sensory methods that I'll talk about in a second. So putting this beer flavor map to life is this will allow you to home in on what kind of attributes you're experiencing and then select those attributes. We can find overlap that way. And so the description test helps you to determine the flavor profile of the sample. And how do you do this? Well, you can do this in any way. You can do this on paper. You can do this just kind of talking with one another, or you can do this in Excel or whatever. You can do this in a whole bunch of different ways. And essentially all you're trying to do is use tasters that are trained or not trained, depending on your objective, to describe the flavor profile of your product using that common language. That way you can aggregate your results. You can find overlap in that language to accurately build that target description. And so the sensory method that is utilized in the description test is what's called CATA, or check all that apply. And I really, really love this method. And I'm glad to see in the sensory literature that CATA is kind of starting to take off because it's easy to understand. if there is the presence or absence of the thing, regardless of the amount of training that you have. And so it's really approachable for companies that don't have 12 hours of training time to devote to your panel before starting to get value from your program. So CATA is basically allows you to identify the most important flavors in a sample. You execute it by panelists selecting all of the attributes that they detect in a sample using that common lexicon. It is literally checking all that apply. And the analysis, you can do a lot of different analysis using CATA. You can add the responses together to find overlap and identify the main flavors. You can compare samples side by side using check all that apply. I just read a paper that compared coffee samples next to one another and the frequency of selected sour notes with brewing temperature and time, which was really interesting. And so they actually found a linear correlation with certain brewing parameters. And so CATA is even used in consumer research. And that is an example that I just used where you are calculating the percent selected to determine to ascertain the magnitude, to make assumptions about the magnitude, which I think I talk about a little later. And so here's a case study of one of the additional applications of having this written target description. This is from my friends at Goose Island. And Brooke was, telling me that she uses her written description of Sophie in their website materials. So they use it for marketing in sell sheets and in taproom menus. And so once you have a target description created using a common lexicon, not, with only chemical attributes, nothing against chemical attributes, but the common lexicon really helps you to utilize this information, not just for your quality control program, but also in your marketing. Imagine how powerful it would be to be able to ask your consumers, what are the attributes that you're seeing in here, get that information, and then feed that back to them as a way of selling it to them using their own language. And so that's what our friends at Goose Island do by utilizing these target descriptions in multiple different ways. And so the step two of any quality control program is to utilize that baseline target description as the basis for flagging samples. And so the next question that we generally have when we move into production is, how closely does this batch adhere to our set target? And you do this using a quick in, out, no go, no go kind of test where panelists evaluate a representative sample of every batch against that set brand profile. And each modality is evaluated: visual, aroma, taste, mouthfeel, separately, and deemed to either be true to target or not true to target based off of the percentage of panelists that say true to target and not true to target. And so you can use this as the basis for comparing batches next to each other. This is essential. This is really essential for products that are fermented products where you don't have a gold standard that is stable. And so it is in many ways almost more accurate to give them a target description using language rather than a comparative sample that is fluid. In some cases, you can use a comparative sample, which is really nice. But this still, having that target description allows you to see potential shifts in flavor and helps you to identify major issues. And so the true to target test, it's basically utilizing that target description to flag samples that are outside of the target flavor profile. And so you use it by comparing the sample next to the flavor target, and then you analyze the percentage of not true to target selections and their comments, and that's it. And that is the basis for running a QC or even an R&D program. And so a case study that I wanted to mention was a friend of ours who actually, I'm using a chocolate example here, but he's actually a canned food producer who, working for a Fortune 500 company, big company, started utilizing this really kind of broad, right matched sensory methodology to evaluate their samples coming through from their production samples throughout their plants. And what happened is after 1 week of, or within the first week of utilizing this true to target type methodology, they found a defect that resulted in a packaging problem, in a big visual problem. And this defect had been going on for a decent amount of time and was going unchecked by their panel using kind of traditional sensory methods like descriptive analysis for quality control. It was going under the radar, and unfortunately they didn't catch it until they started just doing really broad true to target tests. Within that day, they were actually able to identify the machine that was responsible for the problem, and they fixed the problem without really even doing any further investigation. And so that was a really cool, interesting, big win for them. And that, okay, I'm going to go on. There he is. So they were able to troubleshoot that immediately, even without doing any further investigation. But a lot of times in the sensory world, we need to do additional troubleshooting, which is where kind of more precise language can be utilized and should be utilized, and where our language kind of grows and develops to be able to use it as a quantitative tool. And so when you find something, the next thing is to troubleshoot it. So describing defects, we can utilize more descriptive language to do that. So what we're trying to do is pinpoint the presence, absence, or variable intensity of a flavor when we are describing defects. And, what about chemical descriptors? In fermentation, chemical descriptors can be very useful to help lower the amount of time that it takes to really identify what went wrong in our process. So many of the chemical attributes that we train on have a direct root cause to it. And it's my philosophy that the training that you want to do, the chemical training that you do should really align with decisions that you would be able to make. For example, you wouldn't want to train on some esoteric chemical compound that doesn't really have a known origin, and therefore you wouldn't really be able to fix it. And so diacetyl is an example of a attribute that has a very known origin, and you are capable of fixing it when you determine that it's there. And so this can be really helpful to accelerate and pinpoint troubleshooting. And it's, again, especially advantageous in fermented products, but it requires a lot of training. And so I do want to mention a little bit about training. I didn't start timing myself, so I don't really know how long I'm going, but we'll see. So I want to mention the training framework. And this is a framework that I use for any type of training. I get asked specific questions about how do you train a panel for this specific outcome, or how do you train a panel for that specific outcome? Regardless of the outcome that you're looking to determine, there's a framework that can be utilized, and it goes like this. Number one, introduce the concept to the panel, introduce them to known standards. I don't believe in testing a panel before they've had the opportunity to get some sort of calibration. So first, introduce the panel to these known standards. Number two is test their recognition with blind samples. The next time you see them, maybe you give them a blind sample of the thing that they were introduced to the day before, for example. And then calibrate them by revealing the sample's identity and continuing to solidify that learning in their brains. And then monitor the performance in panel and in training, and then keep repeating this process and pivot according to where panelists are best performing or least performing. And so we think about attribute training as being really the only type of lexicon development training that's out there, but there are other ways of developing a lexicon and to better refining the lexicon. This is a training that I like to do that is just kind of easy to run with whatever grocery standards you have out there. And so let's talk about developing lexicons. So introduce panelists to different flavors. You can use grocery standards or different products, and then test their ability to identify those different products. If you're using grocery standards, for example, it can be kind of fun to just go get a bunch of citrus fruit and cut them up and put them in little containers, and then see if they can identify those citrus fruits in a blind type setting. This seems a little silly, but you would be really surprised at how difficult it is to identify the differences with these citruses. And this can help them to get a more precise language. And then you can reveal the nature of the samples, allow them to revisit the standards. And then this, this can kind of look like any way. All right, this is one of the examples of a training that I ran a while ago, where we basically just got a whole bunch of fruits, and all I did was ask everybody to order the fruits in order of least to most similar. And it's a funny project. It's like you're playing with food and whatever, and there's no right and wrong answer. But what's fun about this is it gets people critically thinking about the aromas of these products, and it helps them to orient in their brain what these products kind of really smell like. It's just an opportunity to smell them and to really spend some intentional time with these fruits. All right. And then for one more example, actually 2 more examples for training for true to target. So if you're doing a training that is aligned with the objective of making sure that your panelists can accurately identify samples that are in or out of the range of variation, you introduce and review the product descriptions and standard products. So this is a amber ale that is consistent with what we want. So identify it, evaluate it, use that lexicon, and then test if they can correctly identify products that are true to target and not true to target. So maybe you give them 3 more products. One of them is definitely not true to target. One of them is the same as the control, and maybe one of them is somewhere on the fence, and you can see where they are with that. Then reveal the nature of those products and allow them to discuss and retaste, and then monitor their performance in panel setting with positive and negative control samples, meaning spiking on panel or not. The great thing about this is when your panelists are doing their true to target evaluations on a regular basis, they don't really have any lens into what everybody else is saying. And so this can help calm their nerves a little bit, to lift the veil to see what other people are saying, and they can learn from each other. And then attribute training. We're all familiar with this, but the basic premise is to introduce an attribute in one of your products, hopefully probably your most consistently produced products, and then test to see if panelists can identify the attributes blindly after introducing them to it, and then reveal the sample's identity, let them taste it again, discuss the flavors that they're getting, and then continue monitoring their performance in each training and track that data so that you can identify where those blind spots are. When I started this talk, I talked about, when you heard the title, you probably thought about descriptive analysis, and that makes a lot of sense. Descriptive analysis is the method in which you are scaling specific attributes to get an idea of what that kind of fingerprint description looks like. That's a great method. It's a really precise method, and it's fun and accurate. It's legitimate. It's a legitimate way of using it is in troubleshooting, but not necessarily in quality control rapid analysis. But I wanted to mention descriptive analysis at the very end, because you really have to make sure that your panelists understand the attributes first, and have a good understanding for what are the flavors that are in your product before you can accurately scale it. And I think where we go wrong with descriptive analysis is you can get an average that is just full of noise. If you have 5 panelists that are scaling all over the place, you're still going to get an average, but it might not be all that accurate, and it might be really misleading and could give you some very funky data. And so moving forward, as your panelists recognize your language and are capable of identifying certain descriptors consistently, that is the time where you can start doing kind of the more nitty-gritty analysis. If that's right-sized for the program, right-sized for where you are. So to conclude, every business can benefit from describing their products in a standardized way. Common lexicons can really connect all of the players in the supply chain with the consumers, merchants, and with raw materials producers. And then descriptions can serve as the guide in product development and target and quality control. So there's applications throughout the entire manufacturing process of the brand's life cycle. And then we can refining our lexicon can happen through panelist training. I gave you a couple of examples of ways that you can do that in a more creative way. And then language is just the foundation for properly executing these advanced sensory methodologies that we probably thought about with descriptive analysis. And the great news is you can start now. We have language, we have experience eating and drinking things, and you don't have to do so much training to just start describing your products. If you want to learn more about what we're up to at Draft Lab, if you want to check out what we're doing, we're running a little promo for a free month of free software. You can take a little picture of this if you'd like, the little QR code, or you can just email me, or you can go on our website, but QR codes are all the rage. So there it is. And thank you very much for your time and attention, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Lindsay. That was a really good presentation. Folks, if you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom. We have time for probably a couple. Rachel asks, how do you train people to place more importance on target descriptions and less on the taster's idea or memory of how the beer should smell or taste? Or another way to ask this, how to align scaling in descriptive words to how individuals process sensory attributes?
Yeah, that's a real big question, Rachel. Nice. So, there's really nothing that can substitute for familiarity with the product. There's really nothing. What you want to get away from is the environment in which you sit down at a taste panel and, maybe it's the first time you're evaluating a beer or the third time that you're evaluating a beer, and you don't have any kind of guidance with what it is. And that is a way where there's just, essentially no accountability in your process. There's no accountability within your program. And so it can be very scary. And I've noticed that it is scary for a lot of companies to write down what they're going for and to really set these target descriptions in place, because that means they have to be accountable for it. And so, I'll go on a little bit of a tangent, but one of the important pieces that I didn't really mention in this is before locking in those target descriptions, you really have to get buy-in from management, and you have to get buy-in throughout the production team. And before it gets heated and before you're like, oh, well, what does that really mean? We have to really align on, okay, is this really the thing that we're going for? And if so, great, I'm going to lock it in. If not, then great. And we can modify it accordingly. But to answer your question more directly, nothing can substitute for familiarity, but that shouldn't be the only thing that you're going after. If it makes it more accessible if you can have a target description for everybody, and it allows you to find and identify flavor drift that would probably otherwise go unnoticed if something wasn't written down. So basically you can't get rid of their idea. And in fact, their idea is probably legit. Like how we think about this product is probably legit. And sometimes it's really hard to identify exactly what it is. And sometimes it's just okay to say, this isn't right. And I don't really know why, but it's not right. That can sometimes be a good place to start too. So yeah, you want to use that familiarity, but you also want to have that target description to where you can keep your group of tasters and your process accountable.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much, Lindsay, for your presentation. I think we're going to move on to our next presenter now, but cool. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah. Thanks, friends. Yeah. See you around.
All right. Our next presenter is Campbell Morrissey. Campbell has been working in the brewing and distilling industry for over 10 years, working in facilities ranging from a mountain town brew pub to a nationally distributed craft whiskey distillery. And currently he is the head brewer at Freem Family Brewers in Hood River. Simultaneously, he is working on a doctorate at Oregon State University under Dr. Pat Hayes in the Barley World Lab. His research focuses on barley genotype contribution to malt quality and malt and beer flavor. He is passionate about continuing education and is currently a member of the MBAA Northwest Tech Committee. Thanks, Campbell.
I'm going to try to share my slides, and hopefully that goes better than it did last time. But I
If it
think I've
doesn't,
been
we
a lot
got
of
you.
skills. Technology is not it. That working for anyone?
It still looks dark. Yeah, so let's
All right.
No worries, Campbell. I can, when you're ready, you're ready now.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
thanks, Christina.
Yeah, no problem. Hold on one second. I pull it up. Can everyone see that? Yeah, let me start slideshow. Okay, can you see that?
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Looks good.
Hey, everyone. So today I'm going to be talking a bit about my research, specifically at the Barley Project Lab, and especially on this project related to the potential for what we call updated heirlooms. So this is the idea that can we target some of the contributions from some of our known heirloom varieties? In this case, we use Maris Otter, and start using that in a breeding program to help drive base malt and beer flavor. And this is some follow-up research to this flavor pipeline that we've helped develop here at OSU. Next slide.
There we go.
Just a little bit more about me. I'm still fairly new to the district. I only moved here in June of 2020, and only recently took over as head brewer here at Freem back in March. So just really excited to be part of District Northwest. I moved up from Arizona, where we didn't have an MBAA district, and so we were either SoCal or Rocky Mountain, and it wasn't really a feasible group to be a part of. So very excited to be part of this. Next slide. And just a little bit about barley breeding. I think this is something that many may have heard about, read about, but maybe not familiar for everyone. So not unlike the hop breeding pipeline, but we always start with our germplasm assessment. At any one year, we'll have hundreds of lines in the field. And through that, we're kind of coming up with ideas for crosses. A lot of that work is on disease resistance, drought resistance, improving yields, improving other agronomic qualities. And in this case, we were looking at bringing through some possible flavor advancements. That's either done through traditional crossing and or using double haploid technology to get 100% pure seed stock. Through there, we'll get them into the field and continue to go from a few pounds of seed up to potentially hundreds of pounds of seed. If it's successful there, it goes into the micro malting pipeline. Eventually goes into the full AMBA pipeline. And then if it succeeds there, we have a variety release. So not unlike hops, it's about 10 years. But within that, there aren't any standard steps breeders use for high throughput evaluation of flavor. And we've here at OSU have developed our kind of flavor pipeline, but even that, I just want to give perspective that that's only a very small subset of our germplasm are able to go through that just through the sheer time, cost, and expense. So we've about 10 years ago, we asked the question, does barley variety impact beer flavor? I wasn't asking that question. I was just learning how to brew at a small mountain town brew pub. But some really important people and brewers, the flavor pack, if you will, and the Brewers Association really wanted this question answered. And how can breeders begin to provide insight to barley varieties' contribution to beer flavor, as well as start looking at techniques to help breed in more flavorful barley? So through some great funding here at OSU, we have two awesome pieces of technology. We have our CLP micromalter, which gives us the ability to malt 8 500-gram samples at a go. So we can do really high throughput malting there. We'll do a few hundred lines a year. Small samples, obviously. Most of our plots will only yield a few pounds. So having that 500-gram size is really important. And from the flavor research side, we can then use that for hot steep and some metabolomic analysis. Stepping it up when we do have some lines of serious interest or we're doing some research regarding this beer flavor stuff, we have a mini malter that we can do up to 300-pound batches on. And in this, we can actually use optimized protocols. So knowing what we've learned in our micro malter, we can then decide, okay, well, this is going to take up water differently, or it's going to need a different germination. And we can kind of manage each line individually, which is really important, as we'll talk a little bit about some of the lines we worked on. The other thing is we can really do different malt types. Another project I'm working on, we were looking at kind of a higher kiln English pale type malt, even then moving into like some Vienna and Munich type malts, and kind of seeing how, if those malting types, kind of accentuate or kind of wash out the variety effect. And so from there, we'll have enough to actually start brewing. You can go back.
Yeah, sorry, I hit the wrong button.
No worries. You can go forward one.
Okay. There we go.
So just a little bit about this flavor pipeline. I just want to give some insight into how this all developed, and kind of obviously give credit to the researchers before me who really established this. The first big publication came out in 2017, and that was by Dustin Herb and that group, and looking at really finding that barley variety does matter. Through nano brewing and large sensory panels, they found that barley variety and environment can have distinct contributions to beer flavor, and that the panels were able to actually find differences between those beers. And that also kind of got us started on this updated heirloom idea, using a population that included Golden Promise. Harmony Bettenhausen then started adding the metabolomic approach, actually looking at the chemical profiling of some of these malts and beers, and looking at how we can map that to different sensory outcomes. Starting in 2018, using the kind of malts from different malt houses, but then in 2020, actually using some of the germplasm from the Dustin Herb study. And in 2020, Sarah Wines introduced the hot steep method to the pipeline. Just gave us another tool to start looking at flavor differences, as well as another tool to prepare extracts for metabolomic analysis. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in my study that we just published here in ASBC, that, looking specifically at lines sharing Maris Otter parentage. So this is just a visual idea of what that pipeline actually looks like. It's taking malting to brewing. I'm sure you'll see a picture of that brew house again in Vern's talk. Deschutes has been an excellent collaborator doing some of our brewing for us. But then the hot steep analysis, I can tell you that doing 9 replicates 6 times a day for a few weeks in a row is pretty taxing, but price of research, I suppose. Then doing sensory, running some sensory panels both at OSU and then here at Freem, and then actually doing that chemical profiling using both GC and HPLC. So, we call it the Romp of Otters. This is a family of Maris Otter crosses. And, in the first paper here, we're just looking at kind of where does the contribution of Maris Otter in base malt and kind of research type beers. So these are very much, we're using a pale type malt, and then we're using beers that are single malt and very lightly hopped. This is not, brewed to a commercial type. And so we'll talk a little bit more about why we chose that and what we did in 2.0. So we made crosses of Maris Otter and Elite Winter malting lines. So we use Violetta as well as an experimental selection from the Ackerman group. That's the 04, 028, 36 selection. From these, we made crosses and then doubled haploids. We started with 47, and then over years, they got culled down to 4 based on agronomic performance. As a breeding program, that's kind of like first and foremost our goal. It's like, will it grow, and will it grow successful enough that anyone would actually even bother with it? So of those 4, we then planted larger strips, which provided the grain for the mini malting. And then we then put this through the entire pipeline. So malting, brewing, hot steeping beer sensory, hot steeping beer metabolomics. Question people may ask is, well, why Maris Otter? Frankly, I do think it is one of the few varieties that your normal brewer would actually be able to identify. So it does have some cachet associated with it. But in essence, it's actually, kind of got a really interesting history. It was first released in 1966. So the fact that we're still using this variety and it's still being grown, malted, and used, and almost 60 years later, is fairly impressive, because it was actually dropped from the UK list of approved varieties. Similar to our AMBA, in '89. And so it's really been held on as this kind of heirloom or heritage variety that has, interest of brewers because they, believe it has these unique flavors that contributes to beer. But on top of that, it actually, has provided genetic stock for a lot of the winter malting barley varieties. As you can see here, we have 3 AMBA listed varieties that are in the Maris Otter family tree, and 1 MAGB, that's the Maltsters Association of Great Britain variety in there too. So it's an important variety for its genetics, as well as, for its purported contributions to flavor. So how did these things actually grow? Well, they grew pretty well. As you can see here, DH14969 and DH141515 actually out-yielded both Maris Otter and Wint Malt. O&O and 150115, they actually also out-yielded Maris Otter, but didn't quite out-yield the Wint Malt variety. And below you see some of our other agronomic successes. Tyler earlier talked about plumps. Plumps are going to be down quite a bit, but this year we actually had fairly good plumps. And the only issue we really saw, and this affected kind of everything that came out of our fields around this time, was water sensitivity. And so we did have to adjust our malting protocols accordingly. I will take this moment to point out that while we were able to grow Maris Otter in the first couple of years, or first 3 years, we were unable to grow it for the actual experiment, and that's due to some licensing issues. Currently, there's an agreement within the UK and from the licensor, Robin Apple Limited, to not export any seed for growth or for other malting outside of the UK, and that's part of its identity protection. So when we got into the malt house, we actually saw some really interesting results. So remember, these are the mini malters. So this is going between a 225 and 250 pound batch. The protocols were designed based on our experience in the CLP micro malter. And we, even though we had some experience in the CLP, we always know there's a translation issue, but we also only had 1 shot at this. While we're able to yield, over almost 300 pounds, that's still only enough for 1 batch. So it was really important that we kind of got as close as we could. But we do also take some of this with a grain of salt, because we believe, as Tyler mentioned earlier, as a maltster get used to the variety, they can also kind of figure out how to malt it a little better. But that said, we were pretty pleased. Surprisingly enough, everything kind of modified pretty well, but also we saw really high S over Ts and really high fans and DP. That's not something people associate with Maris Otter. To kind of give us a comparison and something we can kind of use as a reference point, we used a crisp, extra pale, low color Maris Otter malt, and through the same analysis suite. So while we got a COA for that, we then sent this off to the malt analysis lab we used to see how it compared. And real interestingly, the fans came back very high. As you can see, the crisp extra pale was up at 198. So it's not actually out of the realm of possibility that Maris Otter is contributing to this high fan. Similarly, it was a much higher DP than I was expecting, 107, still lower than everything we saw, but much higher than that kind of 75 to 80 you'll typically see on a Maris Otter COA. So some of that could be within malt type, or just maybe it's even just analysis variation, but we're pretty excited that we got to where we were. But honestly, it was pretty surprising that we even kind of moved into AMBA adjunct malt territory. And so once we started going into sensory, we got to start seeing some of these interesting results. So for both hot steam and beer sensory, we did a difference from control and then a check all that apply analysis. So for aroma, everything was different from the control, which is the Wint Malt, other than DH14969. And that was kind of an interesting result, as we'll see in the beer sensory. But what we saw is we started seeing some of these groupings in the check all that apply. So, we saw a couple lines kind of group over here with grainy, sweet, and cloying. We had one kind of close to sweet and sweet aromatic, one in with the bread, and then one in sweet bread. And that was exciting because, those are all descriptors that one would associate with Maris Otter, kind of these like sweeter, toastier, kind of bready, toffee-like character. Interestingly enough, the crisp Maris Otter, the commercial sample, grouped far away from everything and actually grouped closest to bitter and astringent and a little, and close to breakfast cereal. And so while we were very confident in our panel and the ability of our panel to make these distinctions, it was very interesting that that low color Maris Otter did not perform, I think, as well as some of our others. So as we move over to beer sensory, this kind of started changing. As we found that the difference from control, our panelists were not able to really differentiate between the samples. And we found that only DH14969 was different from the control, which is interesting, as in the malt hot steeps, those actually were not significantly different. That said, I think we can always learn something from using our check all that apply as you kind of start forcing people to get a little more granular with what they're working with. And here, we still see some distinct groupings. As mentioned, we didn't make beer with any of the Maris Otter, so the crisp sample is not in this chart. But we did start seeing 150115 and 1515 still kind of grouping in some Maris Otter-like character. We start seeing a grouping of sweet aromatic, sweet, and floral, which is associated with O and O. And then over here, we start seeing 969, which really just kind of went in a grassy and kind of erring towards vegetal. Interestingly enough, and I think this kind of shows somewhat of the success of the panel, as well as kind of where we've gotten with barley varieties, the wheat malts fall squarely in the middle. It's a very neutral beer producer. The kind of accepted threshold value for diacetyl. So what did we learn? Well, we found that we can cross Maris Otter with some contemporary lines, and they will perform, near or above what we expect nowadays for agronomics.
Campbell, I think you're frozen.
Otter attributes. So what do we do next? We start thinking about, okay, what makes Maris Otter special? So speaking to some folks in the know about Maris Otter, they talk about the climate, the soil, and the floor malting process. We do know that floor malting does produce chemically different malt from the same variety made in a pneumatic system. And so given that we don't have access to the British maritime climate and the icknield soils, we decided, well, let's start looking at what if we took one of our more successful agronomic lines and put that into a pilot floor malting process to see how that would actually, if that would accentuate some of those Maris Otter flavors and how much of that malt house effect is playing a role here. So for 2.0, we're asking the question, can we floor malt the top otter and pull through more of those unique flavors? And further, be it due to some climate change and just kind of looking at diversifying supply chain, can we grow winter lines in an environment known for spring and then have these experimental lines perform as well or better than that spring planted copeland? So for this project, it's actually a collaboration between OSU Barley Project, Admiral Maltings, and Seismic Brewing up in Santa Rosa. And it's just been a fantastic collaboration to work with those folks. Briefly, some of you may want to know the difference between spring and winter. Spring barley is just that. It's planted in spring and harvested in middle or late summer. One of the reasons that it's challenging and kind of people are looking for winter barley is that you need to irrigate this when typical water availability is low, but it does still make up the majority of barley grown in the US, which, as we know, was hit really hard by high summer temps. Winter barley, on the other hand, planted in early to late fall and then harvested in early summer. And it does require that low temperature tolerance to overwinter. So kind of depending on where you are, having very, very cold winters can be challenging, especially if you're looking up into Canada. But the benefit is that when you're irrigating is often when water availability is high, either through rainfall or snow melt. And there is some observations that this can be higher yielding. That said, one brewer's opinion on the matter is that spring and winter have very distinctly different flavors associated with them. Whereas spring is kind of sweeter, more malty and fuller, and then winter provides more green and grassy, and that has to do with kind of moisture content and protein content coming off the field. So as mentioned, we sent our line DH1421010 down to Admiral and went through a kind of bespoke pilot floor malting protocol. We were really lucky to work with a collaborator who was willing to kind of develop something that they could malt, between 50 and 200 pounds in their massive floor malting facility. I mean, for a craft maltster, it's still quite large. And the way it worked was we actually steeped each line individually, but then they all got germinated in a carrier grain system where they literally filled kind of mesh bags and they went onto the floor with the carrier malt. So I compared the carrier, which is just the standard commercial floor malting. It's kind of a British pale ale type. CDC Copeland, which was their kind of typical variety for making their English pale malt. The DH1421010 malted on the floor. And then we also compared that to some grain we malted, grown in the same region. So this is the same variety, both O and O, one that was malted at Admiral down on the floor, and then one malted by us up at OSU, just to compare how the pneumatic and the floor looked against each other. And so we found that despite the two different malt houses, we actually saw kind of a variety grouping. We saw a little bit of over modification on the pilot floor malts, as you can see by kind of those pretty high S/T ratings, pretty high fan. But interestingly enough, a lot of things were kept in check, and those beta glucan numbers are very stellar, and very impressed that we saw pretty similar cytolytic modification despite different steep regimes. So first we ran these as a hot steep. We were pretty limited in samples. We did do a micro malt of the O and O. So I was literally working with like 125 grams. So I had 2 shots at it. And we saw pretty distinct differences, but that's again, not to be surprising. These are 2 samples malted to 2 different types of malt, but it also kind of reaffirms that our panel is capable of making some really nice groupings. And the floor malt was pretty characterized by bread, breakfast cereal, sweet aromatic, whereas our pneumatic malt, much grassier, much grainier, a little bit more dough. When we got to the floor malts, our grouping really started to tighten up. As you can see, for many attributes, we map almost identically. We see slight differences in cracker, slight differences in nutty, but we really didn't see any significant differences here. So we're finding, okay, well, from a hot steep sensory and a malt flavor type, we're actually seeing that the floor malting may actually just kind of wash some of those malt differences. That might be a result of the higher kiln temperatures, or just the fact that, at these unique malting types, variety might be washed a little bit. But then let's see what we did with the beer. So beer was a little more interesting, where we saw pretty distinct groupings or distinctly different maps on this radar plot. Copeland produced a beer that was fruity, grassy, grainy, sweet aromatic, whereas O and O was cracker, grainy, and vegetal. So not actually too unlike some of those comments that I mentioned earlier. And that the one interesting thing though is that we did not find that there was a significant difference in preference. We did a straight hedonic, just, do you like one or the other? And while there was a majority that preferred the Copeland beer, of the 26, it wasn't able to be significant. So very interesting. And I think, we do see that we can produce 2 completely different beers with 2 malts made in the same exact protocol. So we kind of reaffirm that variety does make a difference here. But, does it actually make a better beer, and does Maris Otter contribute that? We're not really sure. So what did we learn from the initial conclusions of the ROMP 2.0? This data hasn't been published yet and still kind of getting analyzed. And I have some other areas that I'm looking at to kind of determine that. But basically, we know that floor malting will produce a unique malt with the same variety. Floor malts made from 2 different varieties that aren't unique, but beers did have some interesting differences, something we'd like to continue exploring. I mentioned that, butter was one of the significant descriptors between the 2. But as with the first samples, those diacetyl numbers were quite low, and actually the O&O sample, which was flagged much higher on butter, had a much lower, or not much lower, but a slightly lower VDK, final VDK number. And so we're kind of saying like, okay, well, we used butter extract as our reference sample. Well, what are we actually getting? Is butter, being described as something else, or is there some other driver of the kind of that similar flavor attribute? Most importantly, though, we learned a successfully grown winterline can make a suitable replacement as far as malt quality goes. And that's really interesting. And that's going to kind of fuel a lot of research we have moving forward. So that's it for me. Thank you very much. I appreciate the time. Always excited to chat barley, and happy to answer any questions.
Campbell, thanks so much. Folks, if you have questions, please drop them in the Q&A box at the bottom. We have time for at least a couple. Campbell, can you talk about the beer that you made? What was the style on that? Oops, video might be frozen. Campbell, you still there? Oops. Yeah, you broke up for just a minute. Yeah.
The timing, at least I made it through that.
Yeah. You're back now. Did you hear my question?
I did not.
Okay, sorry, let me repeat. So
say it again?
The beer that you made for your study, what was the base style? Is it all for the two beers that you were comparing? Was it a Helles or pale ale, or what kind of beer was that?
Oh yeah, sorry for not covering that. The first set of beers, like I mentioned, was just a very research type beer, single malt, very low bittering charge, and no kind of late addition, and using a neutral yeast. This was actually kind of a Helles type in the second one, where we did encourage a little more, commercial type. And that's something we're looking at in kind of greater detail in some other projects. Is kind of, we know that variety makes a difference for some of these research type beers, but when you actually start making them into even like lighter commercial type beers, do we notice those differences hold up?
Great. Carl Lockert has I believe, a tongue-in-cheek comment, but he says most significant is the development of malt sensory beyond malty and grassy.
Yes, and we actually pared down the descriptors in the second study from what we used in the first study, because some of them just weren't being used very much, but we still use 9. So I'll take a 7 attribute upgrade.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions for Campbell before we move on? All right, Campbell, thanks again so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Campbell. So I'm just going to jump in here real quick. If folks, we totally, with everything going on, forgot to have you vote on the spring minutes. So I'm going to launch a quick poll. It's going to pop up on your screen. And if you can just hit yes or no real quick, and we'll get this taken care of. And then we can move right on. Campbell, I'm going to go ahead and move you back over to attendee. Okay, go ahead, Robert. It's all yours.
All right. So our next presenter is Trent Leslie. Trent was raised in Ashland, Ohio, and graduated from St. Louis University in 2006 with a bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering. He then changed course, spending a few years in Southeast Kansas as an oil and gas landman, researching title in courthouses and negotiating contracts with landowners. In 2009, he changed course again and moved to Cincinnati, Ohio to study biology at the University of Cincinnati and spend more time with Sarah, his future wife and fellow craft beer enthusiast. In 2013, he graduated with a master's degree in biology from the University of Cincinnati. A longtime homebrewer and volunteer turned employee, Trent then spent over 7 years at Mad Tree Brewing developing and managing the quality program. In 2021, Trent relocated to the Pacific Northwest and is currently participating in a bioinformatics co-op with EMD Sorono. Thanks, Trent.
Sure thing. Thank you.
Yeah. And Christina, do you have the recording we're going to pull up?
I'm ready to go. So Trent, whenever you just let me know when to hit.
Yeah, I'm ready when you are.
Okay.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Predictive Sensory Modeling, use of design of experiments, and R to optimize dry hop mixtures for aroma and flavor. As mentioned, I am technically formally of Mad Tree Brewing, but all of this work was conducted there, so they get full credit and acknowledgments for supporting this work. And along those lines, if you were at the virtual ASBC conference and caught either my or Becca's talks there, this will be pretty familiar. It's kind of a rehash of those two talks put together. Today's agenda, I'm going to start with an intro to design of experiments, sometimes called DOE or DOCS for short. And then talk about a specific kind of experiment called mixture experiments, which is what we used in this work. And then talk about the experiment itself, the experimental design, the hardware that we use to set up the experiment, and then the data collection involved. And then moving on to the R analysis, we'll talk about the data format for putting the sensory results into the script. We'll do a little overview of the script itself and its output, and then kind of tie it all together at the end and finish with some Q&A. Starting from the top, so design of experiments is understanding complex systems such as beer by intentionally designing and executing experiments that help us investigate how variables in a system interact. This is kind of an intuitive thing for scientists and engineers, but there's some really good formal approaches that take a lot of the guesswork out in order to design experiments that provide the most insight for the amount of work you have to put into it. Off to the right there, I've put a few books there. That first one, DOE Simplified, is a really nice introduction to design of experiments itself. The second one is RSM Simplified, which is response surface modeling, which is good for like processes, kind of an engineer's book. And then that last one is Formulation Simplified, which is all about mixture experiments, which is what we'll be talking about. These three books are kind of a trilogy put out by the folks at Staties, which make this really nice software for design of experiments. We've been focusing on R a lot because it's like the free open source option, but there are very nice, sophisticated software applications out there for design of experiments that are not free. So the whole goal with design of experiments is to set up a systematic experiment that will provide mathematical models for you to better understand the relationships between and among variables in your system. In this case, dry hop mixtures in a beer. So a quick overview of a comparison of the approaches. The easier approach is the one variable at a time thing where you just change one thing, see what happens, and then change another thing next time in the next batch or whatever, and see what happens. But there are some disadvantages to that. You only get to look at one variable at a time, so you can't see any interaction effects. And then with beer in particular, if you're if you're doing experiments on batches of beer, you need to account for 2 weeks each time you want to tweak something, and you can't compare the changes that happen from batch to batch if you change something different each time, because they're different batches, and beer by its nature is variable. And of course it's inefficient, just because to be able to gain any deep insights, it's going to take a lot of time. Whereas with the design of experiments approach, you can look at a bunch of variables at once, learn about a whole region of the flavor space, as we call it, more than one dimension. And then you can see interactions between the variables, such as like in ours is like the difference between the interaction between like the mixture itself and the hop load. And then it also helps minimize the effects from natural variation and fermentation or anything else in the process, because you're doing all of the experiment on one batch of beer. So you don't have to worry about batch to batch variation and fermentation or how the mash went, and so on and so forth. So in the end, it's more efficient. There's a lot more work that goes into it up front, and it takes a team, but it is more efficient and more insightful after all is said and done. So there are different types of experiments that you can do, and the approach you take depends on the type of data you're doing and collecting, and what questions you want to answer. And just, as a heads up, these plots come from that software I mentioned earlier. There's nice pairwise comparisons. That second one is a preference contour plot. And the third one is a ternary plot. I'll get more into that in a second. And then that last one is a response surface plot. You can also see how like the second one and fourth one are related. The second one is just like the fourth one, but the surface is projected onto that two-dimensional graph itself. So that's why it's called a contour plot. It's the contours of the surface projected onto that two-dimensional plot. And that one's used a lot in the process optimization. So you can look at efficiencies against a couple continuous variables and gain insight into your process. But today we will be focused on mixture experiments. So mixture experiments are kind of neat. The contour plot that you've been seeing is a two-dimensional slice of a three-dimensional factorial space. And that slice is the mixture of the three components. So in the three-dimensional plot there, the X1 axis could be hop A, X2 would be hop B, and X3 would be hop C. And in that two-dimensional slice there, those all add up to one. That plane represents all the mixtures that can happen with that combination of hops or mixture of anything. And in fact, okay, so the ternary plot on the left kind of shows how to read the ternary plots. So the numbers are the fractions of each component. So the green numbers are the fraction of component 1, the blue the fraction of component 2, and the red the component fraction of component 3. And you can see where three lines intersect in the mixture plot, that always adds up to 1, and that is the respective mixture fractions of each component at that particular point in the space. And one of the classic examples of a ternary plot comes from soil science, of all things, and it's kind of how soils that are made up of clay, silt, and sand, the different combinations of those mixtures are defined. So you can see that at the corners of the mixture plot, you got 100% clay or 100% silt or 100% sand, and then the respective combination of those can make different kinds of loam and different kind of combinations of defined soils. So that's kind of a fun example that takes it outside the context of recipe formulation or anything like that might help you understand it a little better. So if you focus on the ternary plots on the left there, those are kind of our mixtures for our 3 different hop loads. So our hop load for 0 might be 1 pound per barrel. Our hop load for -1 might be a half barrel or a half pound per barrel. And then +1 might be 1.5 pounds per barrel. And the 18 runs or legs allows you to get more model terms. So there's some squared terms in there, which allows you to see some curvature in your models, which is definitely something that can happen with sensory data. Sensory is notorious for having antagonistic and synergistic effects. So more likely than not, it can quadratic is probably an accurate representation of sensory data. And then on the table, those are kind of our hop fractions. So we got 3 columns for the 3 kinds of hops, and then we got our hop loads. So you can see for each hop load, there are 6 runs, and you can see in the illustration of the ternary plot, the red dots kind of indicate where in the mixture space those runs are. One at each point of the mixture space, which is just that 100% that particular hop, and then 50-50, every combination of 50-50. I should also mention that this is just like a generic template too. So this is able to be used for any mixture experiment that you can do 18 runs for, and it'll get you the same insights. So, you can use this for hops, you can use it for other adjuncts, you can use it for soil science, you can use it for anything. But if you don't have the ability or the equipment to do 18 runs, we've also put the 12 runs option where you lose your quadratic terms, but you can still get some good insight. So this one, it does all 6 for the 0 load, but then it only does the 50-50 mixtures for the -1 and the +1. And if you really want to just look at the basics, there's a 9-run one where you just look at the 50-50s for the -1 and the 1s, and the pure hop mixtures at the 0 load. Okay, and this is our experiment. Our goal was to finalize a dry hop recipe for a new double IPA brand. And it involved 3 hops, but we did tweak the mixture recipe. So we only went from 0 to 100 with just hop A, but with hop B and C, we only went from 0 to 50%. So the goal was to definitely use hop A in this mixture. Our experimental range for the dry hop load was 0 to 1.9 pounds per barrel. And things we did not study was any hot side stuff or any other additional hops in the mixture or any yeast strains. So the recipe development team had those pretty well established by the time we conducted this experiment. Okay, now to the fun part. This is a picture of our setup for actual collection of the beer and dry hopping and serving. So when we do these experiments, there's a general process. In the picture, we're sanitizing them, so we do run peracetic acid through them prior to collection. This sanitizes them, of course, but it also purges them with CO2. And then we collect into them from the fermenters. We have a little adapter that goes from the sample ports to the same Corny adapter that the faucet comes from. And then if necessary, we apply some CO2 head pressure from the fermenter. But with the larger fermenters, up 15 barrels and up, we don't have much trouble getting enough flow from the fermenters. and then they are wheeled into the lab, and we dose the hops into each individual torpedo keg, and then they are all placed in a chest freezer that is set to our dry hop temperature, which is typically 62 degrees. And then they are stored there until they are moved to the hop cooler, which is kind of our crash. And then we carb them in the torpedo kegs for 1 or 2 days. We kind of test it throughout. And from there, they're able to be chilled. They just stay on the hop cooler, and then they're chilled there, and we pour the samples and serve the samples from there. So these costs are broken down for a 10 vessel collection system, which is what we started out with, and then we kept adding, and we ended up with 18, which is what we used to run this experiment. So the rack on the casters costs a couple $100. Those torpedo kegs go for about $80 a piece, and then a CO2 manifold for each torpedo keg, and the tubing, $200. And then there's various fittings, which is kind of ambiguous, but the bulk of that $400 is going to be the faucets, and there's some random fittings like the hose clamps and stuff like that are used for the general assembly of the tubing and CO2 manifold. You got your CO2 tank, and then we have a chest freezer to store them in at the temperature that we dry hop our beer at, or whatever we want to use it for. And a scale for measuring out the small amount of hops. So you need a pretty good one to be able to measure out this amount of hops. For a total of $3,000. It's an investment, but we think it's worth it. The first time we tried doing this, we did it into growlers, and it was a nightmare because we had to have everyone do sensory the same day, and this setup is more consistent, allows us to dispense samples throughout the day, throughout the week, and it is just a much more reliable system for executing these experiments. So sensory data collection. We had 15 panelists from Trained Research Panel. With 18 runs, we split it up with 2 groups, 10 samples to each, with a couple of the runs going to both groups of panelists. And this is just so the panelists don't get fatigued in a single sitting of doing the sensory work here. There were 7 aroma attributes, 8 taste attributes, and then overall preference. And we relied a lot on the overall preference. And this was collected over a 1-week span. You can see a kind of a subset there of our paper sensory sheet there on the right. So the columns are the individual runs or torpedo kegs or samples. And then the rows are all the different attributes. And then these paper sheets were transcribed into a Google document for putting it into the R script. So all the analysis for this project was done in R, which is the free and open source statistical programming language. In the analysis, we did do statistical blocking of panelists to remove variation in how each panelist uses the 0 to 7 or 0 to 10 scales. And then the contour plots were made, and then an optimization was done for preference. I'm going to keep it pretty high level for the use of the script and stuff, but if you want to get the full tutorial, check out the talk from the ASBC conference back in June, and that'll give much more detail on how to actually put the script into use. But I still wanted to go back and provide some background and some additional resources for R and use of R in the brewing industry. It kind of was all kicked off with Eddie and Drew back in 2016 and 2017. They did a brew house efficiency project down at St. Arnold's, and Drew did a lot of analysis in R and did a really good talk about it in 2017, which kind of kicked off our work together in kind of promoting R and coding and general nerd stuff with craft beer. And that kind of culminated in 2019 with the ASBC workshop. Drew, Luke, and I worked together to put that on, and that bit.ly link there is still active. So if you want to go there and you're starting from zero, that shows you how to install R and install RStudio, and from there you should be able to get yourself in a good spot to use the script in this talk. So I mentioned earlier that the Century sheets were paper and then transcribed into a Google Doc. Then that Google Doc was exported as an Excel spreadsheet. So this layout is the format that the script will take in. So those first 7 columns can't change. The first column is the run, the second column is the panelist, the third column is the sample ID, and then the 4th, 5th, and 6th are the 3 things to be mixed and their respective mixture fractions. And then the 7th column is the hop load. So you can go in and you can change the names of the columns, that the things that are going to be mixed, but you need that those changes need to be reflected in the script, and that is covered in detail in the ASBC presentation. But those 7 columns there need to stay the way they are. Columns 8 on are your response variables. Those can be as few or as many as you want, and they can be whatever you want them to be. But at the end of the day, the important things are that it needs to be an Excel spreadsheet, and those first 7 columns need to be the way they are, and that's how the data needs to be formatted to be able to use the script. This is a quick screenshot of the script. The script and the PowerPoint files are available on GitHub. You can go there and download everything, and there will be some things that need to be changed in the script before you can use them, such as that file name, and a few other things that are mentioned in the ASBC webinar. And another thing I wanted to go through were the 3 library packages that are needed for this script. That first one is Read Excel, which is what allows you to import the Excel file. The second one is the Mixture Experiment library, which I got from that Design of Experiments in R book I mentioned earlier. And in that book, there are some examples that I use to make this work. And then that last library is a correlation plot, or core plot library, that generates that correlation plot, which I will show you in just a second. And this is kind of a quick overview of the output. So the left is the contour ternary plot. You can see how our 0 to 50 ranges are represented there for both Citra and Simcoe. Kind of gives it like a cool diamond pattern in the mixture space. So a few notes about the contour plot. The first being that the script will put out 6 files, 6 contour plots for each response variable you look at. So this is a preference one, and it is one of the 6 that the script generated. The script generates one linear model plot and one quadratic model plot for each hop level. And in this, we have 3 hop levels, so 6 total plots for each response variable. So in ours, there's dozens of plots to go through when, you break it down by all the different characteristics. So the second thing to mention is the min and max of whatever parameter or response variable you're looking at, in this case, preference. On the right side, it actually lists the value and at what mixture that occurs. The order they're in is the order that the mixture experiment library, our library, takes them in the script, and it defines the top of the triangle as A, the left side as B, and the right side as C. So the maximum here is a 5.071 at a 50-50 mixture of Mosaic and Simcoe. And that's actually what we went with in our recipe. And the third and final thing I wanted to mention were the stats at the bottom of the contour ternary plot. There's some general information. The hop load equals 1. That tells you what hop load it is. And then it gives you an R squared and an adjusted R squared, and then a range. So in the case of this, the range in preference is over 1, which we tend to think is meaningful on the preference scale of 0 to 7. But the important thing is that R squared and adjusted R squared. Those give you an idea of how statistically significant the results are. I know in biology, an R squared of 0.3 is pretty good given the variation in biology. So I think that is pretty meaningful in sensory as well. But yeah, you'll have to, there's no hard cut rules, so you'll have to kind of use your judgment when it comes to those parameters. And another thing that the script puts out is a correlation plot, and how those work is the grid where 2 of the response variables intersect kind of indicates how much they correlate. So the darker blues, the more they positively correlate, and the more red they are, the more they're negatively correlated. So something we'd be interested in here is for the preference column or row, depending on how you want to look at it. So preference is negatively correlated with resinous taste, and positively correlated with citrus aroma and taste. So then that correlation with preference we would use in conjunction with all our other contour plots to determine what would be a good hop mixture. So like you can go look at citrus aroma or citrus flavor contour plots at 50-50 Mosaics and Simcoe, and say like, okay, they're really high citrus, but then you can go look at resinous taste, and if that's also really high there, maybe you want to tweak the mixture to kind of scale down your resinous taste too. But I think it was pretty low there too, which makes sense. I mean, if it's all correlated with preference, usually they kind of make sense in the contour plots, in that when preference is high, citrus is also going to be high, and resinous taste is also going to be low. All right, so let's bring it all together now. We've covered a lot of ground, from experimental design to experimental execution to data collection to data analysis, and now we're kind of at the hard part. So it's not as easy as just taking your optimum preference. You sometimes got to look at other things. You have other constraints such as cost and time, and you just now it's time to kind of pull it all together, talk with your team, determine what's important, and ultimately try to decide what's most likely to lead to the best possible product. I mean, the reality is that sensory is messy, and testing it is very difficult, and beer is complicated. But we found that design of experiments has really helped guide us in our recipe development. I just want to give a shout out to all the crew at Mantry, in particular the Flavor Space Force team, and yeah, it takes a lot of people and a lot of conversations to get these things up and running and off the ground and running as smoothly as they have. So kudos to the Mantry crew. And with that, I thank you for your time, and I open it up to questions.
All right, thanks, Trent. That's cool stuff.
Thank you.
Yeah, and by the way, welcome out to the Northwest, to Washington.
Loving it.
Yeah.
Happy to be in this district.
Great. All right, everybody, if you have questions for Trent, please drop them in the Q&A box. Trent, what was the time frame that you said I guess how frequently would you be running these trials of like 19 hop combinations or 10 hop combinations?
It would kind of depend on what the recipe development team needs, but it works like a beer. So we collect like post fermentation, pre-dry hop, and then it kind of finishes in those torpedo kegs. So you got to leave a couple weeks, at least 2 to 3 weeks, for the beer to finish and to run the sensory on it.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's the turnaround for the hardware. And then you probably got to leave a week after that for analysis. So all in all, probably takes about a month to knock one of these out.
Yeah. And while you were there, Mantry was doing that pretty frequently, or how often do you run that rigorous of a flavor experiment?
Yeah, we were churning them out all the time. Once we got it kind of the pipeline figured out, yeah, the recipe development team really liked not needing to focus on dry hop stuff as much as other things. They could focus on the malt bill or what yeast they want to use and stuff.
Great. Yeah, that's really interesting. I appreciate the, it's definitely something that we work on too a lot, is process trialing, and it's cool to see it seems like an efficient way to get a lot of different information out.
Yeah, and with a good experiment, like you can get multiple recipes out of it too. You can find different. You can look at the different sensory parameter contour plots and find different spaces in the flavor space, and different. It's amazing how much variation you can get just from the dry hop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. We got one audience question here. He says, "Hey Trent, can you maybe go over the terms you described in the beginning of the presentation? Were those supposed to represent models for variable, correlation, linear, quadratic, polynomial, etc.?"
Yeah. So the linear versus quadratic is just whether or not you have like a square term in there, which is, from a modeling point of view, just multiplying the variable by itself. So what you can do is get, with sensory, it's better to use, I think, quadratic, because you do have the antagonism and synergy in sensory. So you get like citrus canceling out or being amplified across different mixtures. But the trade-off is that you need more runs. So it's harder to get a statistically significant model with a quadratic model with like only 10 runs. That's why we bumped it up to 18 eventually.
Great. All right. Well, thanks again, Trent, for your time. We really enjoyed your presentation, and hope to continue to see you around the district.
Right on.
Yeah. All right, folks. This is we're coming up on our last presentation. We actually caught up quite a bit of time now, so we're only about 10 minutes behind. Our next speaker is Vern Johnson. So Jeffrey Vernon Johnson, aka Vern, is from Chelan, Washington. He started at Deschutes in April 2014 in the tasting room as a tour guide and transitioned into the brewing department through an internship program in September of 2015. He spent a few years on the production floor, spent 9 months as the pilot brewer, spent a year as the barrel aging brewer, came back to the production floor as a lead brewer, and has recently transitioned into the head brewer role for Deschutes Pilot Brewery. He loves beer, woodworking, his family, and sunny weather. So welcome, Vern.
Thanks so much. Can you guys see my screen and hear me?
Yes, we can.
That's great. Cool. Thank you so much for having me, and really excited to drink beer with folks together in the future and not be doing this via online. But here we are, and I'm going to talk about Deschutes and how we have kind of evolved our R&D slash product development over the last number of years. And so, yeah, to give you a kind of an overview, Deschutes was founded in '88. We have a little 10-barrel pub downtown Bend that's a direct fire system. And we opened up a pub in Portland in 2008 that's a 20-barrel Casper Schultz system. And so a lot of our R&D either came originally from the pub and that fire system, or for the last few years from the Portland pub as well. So those were kind of our big drivers of where beer has come from. And obviously we have a production facility in Bend as well, just across the river from the pub. And it's in '93, it was a 50-barrel JV brew house. And then in 2004, we expanded to a 150-barrel Hoopman brew house. And so one of the struggles that we definitely had early on was trying to flavor match or take beers brewed at the pub and get them scaled properly, not only to the JV, but from JV to Hoopman and pub to Hoopman and Portland to Hoopman and all that kind of stuff. And so in 2017, we installed a really fantastic, fun pilot brew house, which is super fun to brew on. And this is just kind of an overview picture from the brew deck. Like I said, built in 2017, took us a while to get this thing up and operational in some form of brewing consistently, as well as, how it looked as far as getting it staffed. And then it's a completely automated system, and there are only a couple hand valves on this, and all of the integration that goes with our automation team and what that looks like to be able to transfer, a concept and recipe and to put it actually through the system, and then how all those little tweaks get ironed out as we go along. Now, here we are 5 years into this, or pretty close here, and it is a super fun Cadillac to brew on with its occasional, just like yesterday, there was an automation glitch and I had to dump the batch beer that I was brewing, but it's a real rare occurrence now. But to give you an idea why this brew house is super cool, seven brew vessel system. There is a mash tun, a lauter tun, a pre-run tank, just a wort collection vessel, and then from there, the real ingenuity or flavor of this system is that it then splits out to 2 different wort streams, Kettle 1 and Kettle 2, Whirlpool 1 and Whirlpool 2, and then we have 13 fermenters and 7 bright tanks. And so it really is up to the dreamer of what you can create off of a single wort stream. And so you can, I'm sure you can, you can take the same wort stream and you can hop it differently on the hot side and ferment it the same and come up with potential, sensory analysis on what those iterations could look like. I mean, the options are endless. You can take the same wort stream, same hot side kettle hopping, and then dry hop it differently, dry hop it with different timing, ferment it with different yeast strains, different pitch rates. I mean, really the variables are whatever you can come up with. So it's super fun in that way and has excelled our new product development, like incredibly so. I guess to cover its size, it's a 3-barrel max capacity system and gets split. So we usually yield right around 1.3 to 1.5 barrels per wort stream. And then we have 12 fermenters that are 1.5 to 2 barrel capacity. And then we have one fermenter that is a little over 3 barrel capacity and one bright tank that's a little over 3 barrel capacity. And the other 6 bright tanks are right around that 1.5 to 2 barrel capacity. So this is another picture of what it looks like down from below. You can see the lauter tun there with the door to open it up. And you can get an idea with all the pumps and all the different automation and automated valves that you can see. Here's a picture of our fermentation cellar. The system as a whole was designed to try to mimic our Hoopman system as closely as possible. And the fermenters themselves were designed to mimic the geometry of you can see the bottom of the fermenters up above the little cone shapes. Those are our Zeeman 1,000-barrel fermenters. And the fermenter shape was designed to match that geometry shape so that we could get as close to flavor development and close to flavor matching as we could through design. Here's a quick look at our bright tanks. And then, like I said, this system is completely automated. This is just a quick system overview of what a page looks like. We use a program called Delta V, which is very much used apparently in oil refineries and not very often in the brewing industry. But we have a pretty amazing automation team that allows the system to run extremely smoothly. And the really cool thing about this system being so automated is that there leaves very little variables and mistakes that can happen through that experimentation process. No forgetting that you're lautering, or it takes out the user error as much as possible, as long as you're doing that upfront work to get recipes dialed and all the automation parts of it dialed. And we definitely had our growing pains with this early on, but has really worked out fantastic for us, and it's coming into its own quite well. Here's a kind of a zoomed in look on each, so you can grab each vessel and each kettle and each one of those valves, and just gives you kind of an idea of just like how complex one vessel is. This is just the number of valves and pumps and setups just on one single vessel, and it gives a lot of control over your parameters. So why this is so cool. I mean, the flavor matching possibility and the quick scalability is just it's huge for a company, I'd say, especially for Deschutes. And I can imagine for any brewery, I think that's trying to run a pilot or R&D program is trying to make sure that you can brew your same, for us, maybe like that's fresh squeeze, black beet porter, Meerpon, and we can brew those on our pilot system and know that they can run through sensory and run very close to not identical to our production batches, and being able to have that confidence that then the next, whatever brew or new product that we're trying to develop, that we're going to have that scalability, confidence going into putting it into Hoopman. And furthermore, the reps that we're able to run through this system. So we brew right around an average of 2 days per week. And so that works out to 4 unique brews per, so right around 2 different unique beers per year. And the cost is very low, once we've made this upfront investment, but the cost is extremely low. We're only, the risk and the cost for potentially dumping 1.5 barrels of beer is really low in the grand scheme of how quickly we can go through experimentations and being able to be more risky, instead of like having something like the pub, which is 10 barrels, and you have to put that out. It's much more cost prohibitive to dump 10 barrels if your experiment didn't work. If you wanted to throw a bunch of star anise and brew it, who knows? There all kinds of crazy ideas that we've come up with and put through the ringer over here, which is super fun, is that experimentation portion and being able to have the connection with brewers on staff and being able to have a space that we can be creative and be low risk and yeah, super fun. And there is a sign that it took me a while to, it felt counterintuitive, but you know, I do believe that standardization allows for creativity. You know, when we can just go through and eliminate all the variables for our brew house system, and that the brew itself is going to be the same processing as maybe the next beer that you're trying to compare it to, it really opens up a lot of potential doors for getting the information that you're seeking by eliminating those variables and creating standardizational processes for how you're brewing in R&D, so that you can brew the same beer, dry hop it differently, and be like, oh, well, I thought I was going to enjoy this, but I truly enjoy, you know, this other hop. You know, the mosaic really pops on this one, or whatever it might be. Another really cool portion of this R&D process, and just how important I think the piece of data collection, sensory, and note-taking is for creating new products. I'd say, like, for our process, how we do that, our data collection, we have a very robust system through Ignition. There are some really great ones through Brewery Pi, and yeah, other ways to, but just making sure that you're going through and collecting all the data that you are working through, I think is super important. It's been really helpful for us to be able to go back and take a look at all those notes, 200 brews, and going through and tasting all those throughout the year. It's really easy to get them all kind of lost in my head, along with all the beers that we run through the pub and production, and just being able to have great data collection, notes, and sensory. So for sensory, we have a sensory team, but I'd say, you know, well before we even get to using our sensory team, we just have what we call beer drinking meetings, and they happen every Wednesday at the moment. And so any beers that are coming through our pilot pubs, we all get together with a few folks and drink up those beers, drink beers from outside, you know, the brewery and from the brewing community, and take notes on those and try to get inspiration and yeah, taking a look analytically at what we're doing versus others, and it's fun to drink beer. So. And then the other thing about this system is that it is super fun to share with the community, and I think a big part of research and development here at Deschutes and has been is the connection to the farmers, the growers, you know, brokers, and the world of brewing science, and wanting to give back to this community. So I think, you know, one of the things that we do is, you know, like, for example, Campbell recently was talking about the barley project that he was working on and doing, you know, we contributed to the brews to go through and make those, to brew all those beers with those different malts. And we work with the Hop Research Council, as well as the Hop Quality Group, and how exciting it is to be at that point, to be able to have a system, whatever size or whatever it may be, that you can be able to create those connections with all those farmers, to be able to bring different hop varietals in that they're excited about, hear what they're excited about. You can talk about what you're excited about. You know, bringing in people to do collaborative brews. You know, we have Pink Boots Society brew in here not that long ago. There are a lot of ways that we can use the system to work on community development, and how important, you know, this brewing community is. And that's what drew me into this career in the first place, just how cool this community is. So I think it's a really important part about research and development, and what we do at Deschutes is sharing. And let's see here. So yeah, so how we utilize our resources. So basically how those 200 brews get broken up. You know, the big portion of that is product development and going through and working on beers that are either driven by, you know, for us, whether it's sales and marketing, market research, brewer ideas, whatever it may be that we feel is essential, that product development and what that looks like takes up a big portion of our brewing time over here. We spend a lot of time being creative, and we try to get brewers from the floor and that don't get a chance to be creative on a frequent basis to get over here and get their ideas put into liquid form so that we can keep taking different ideas and utilizing the strengths what our community has, our direct community here at the brewery. The other, that could fall into a bunch of different things. It could be like fresh hops. There could be, but process improvements, if we're taking a look at, wanting to use different salts in a beer or different hop combinations in a beer, or potentially using a different yeast strain in a beer and what those process improvements look like, and then research like I touched on a bit ago. So the ideas, basically, how do we at Deschutes come up with, from idea to final product in the market? And so I think one of the coolest things about working at Deschutes is that I truly feel that anyone can come up with a beer here, whether you're working in, the pub or, in sales and marketing or tours or whatever it might be. It always has felt really collaborative, and I really have enjoyed that because, man, I think with my current position of trying to drive some of these decisions here in this pilot brew house, I am always seeking ideas from people and looking for different concepts on flavors and whatever people might be inspired by. Of course, we use our brewers, and we have an R&D team here at Deschutes that anyone is welcome to be a part of within the brewing department. We do get driven by sales and marketing trends and what that looks like, and then who brews? Anyone. To give you we have a head brewer at our Bend pub. We have a head brewer and another brewer at our Portland pub, and then myself, and then we have a rotating crew of folks that get to brew here in Pilot. But anyone can come brew. Just had somebody from analytics come down for a brew day and wanted to talk about a different beer that he would love to come down and brew with his own idea. So we really are super open to anyone, and I think that that's a really great way to be able to glean as many ideas as you can from your company. But the most recent, this is what's called stage gate, and this is a very recent development in how beers are currently being developed. And so what we had done in the past, we've, give an example of like how it's been successful, or I guess the benefits and drawbacks of each methodology. We're relatively, we are a big company here at Deschutes, and with that big ship, sometimes it takes us a little while to turn that ship and maybe come up with a new beer. But one of the things, like for example, brewed IPA, we put out a brewed IPA pretty quick, and that was super unsuccessful. We've made some other beer choices and malt beverage choices that we could have used a more formalized process to analyze its success before putting it into a full market, or what that looks like. So we have taken a pivot towards this just more standardized approach to how we're going to go ahead and test the idea to launching it full footprint. And so for us, this stage gate is just this stage one, which is idea development, which is basically just idea sandbox. You have just a bunch of different ideas out there, and whatever it might be that people are excited about that we'd love to get running through the pilot or the pubs to be able to brew these up and put those ideas into liquid. Stage two is that once it hit that gate and we decided, well, actually that beer didn't turn out like we wanted, it's either we're gonna kill it and put it on the side, or different research, or other people weren't as excited about it as we were, then we can kill it or say it's delicious, and we move it into stage two, which is just kind of refining for us in pilot or pub, and taking a look at BOM costs, how much does the materials cost, where are we getting the materials, and taking a look at kind of more of a broader picture of how maybe if we're going to scale this, what is that going to look like? Getting it in front of people, putting it at the pubs. For the pilot, I produce right around 3 kegs per bright tank, and those either get put into our shifties, which is just our community drinking closet here in the at Deschutes, or in the tasting room to get feedback from not only ourselves here at Deschutes, but the consumer. And then for the pubs, obviously, at the pubs themselves. And then if it's successful at stage 2, then that would mean that we would either progress it into stage 3. And so this is commercializing and what that looks like, finally putting it into a can and a package and doing a small launch and getting some broader feedback on what that beer looks like. And then as that continues to be successful, then it launches into stage 4, which is our full footprint here at Deschutes, and kind of a continual reviewal process of what that beer is doing in the market, and continually taking a look at different beers within our portfolio and looking to make sure that they're staying updated not only to today's market, but that we're making sure that the flavor is in line with our current standards, or current market tastes. But yeah, so that gives kind of an overview. This is, like I said, a relatively recent process for us, and I am really digging how it goes through and just helps us be more analytical about the decisions we're making, as far as what gets to move on, so that we're not rushing beers that maybe aren't going to do as well as we'd hoped. Yeah, it's just basically a written version of that last one, and that looks like. Yeah, I think trying to think of anything else in there that I really wanted to cover. I think another thing that I think we do really well here, or is just trying to be as conscientious with our raw materials as possible, and really tracking our lots and trying to pay attention to what varietals of hops and lots of hops are going into our beers in our pilot scale, to make sure that when we transition into production, that we're tracking that and taking good notes on that, so that we're not all of a sudden using a different lot at scale and realizing the beer tastes wildly different than when we intended. And yeah, just being really conscientious of how we make those decisions. Yeah, any questions or?
Great, thanks, Vern.
Kind of sped through there.
Yeah, we're 10 minutes early. Cool. Yeah, really great presentation, folks. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box. I had a quick question on the pilot scale. What are you doing for clarification to kind of match your larger batches?
So we've gone with a number of different things over the time, but we just use fining agents. We started out with a filter, but it was just way more of a pain in the butt than it was worth. We only are working with about a barrel of beer, and that filter size, that canister that we originally had, basically took that whole thing, and then the losses that we created and all that kind of stuff. So we use just with Biofine, we use Isinglass, Biofine, Nalco, use a number of them, and then depending on the yeast strain, we may not need anything based on its flocculation.
Do y'all use the pilot system? You talked a lot about the creative and the kind of brand development or flavor development type projects. Do you also do, like, you're having a process problem you're trying to work on, like adjust your yeast management strategy and do it on the small scale before scaling it up, or you have like a haze issue you're trying to track, like sort of doing more of like a research for the existing brands?
Definitely, yeah. So we'll use it for auditing different raw materials that were maybe used in the beer that originally got scaled, maybe not seeing the haze that we were looking for, bringing it back to pilot, messing around with some of the raw materials and making that adjustment on scale, whether or not we see that. We also, the production facility is just on the other side of that wall. And so the other cool thing about the location of this is that we can bring beer in prior to dry hop. That's at scale, bring it into our fermenters, dry hop them differently, and be able to use them in that fashion as well, to be able to take that same wort stream from production, dry hop them differently, and be able to make kind of some educated decisions on transitions.
Awesome. Toby's asking, how do you determine the success or failure of a draft pilot batch in your pubs?
So for the draft pilot batch, that one's somewhat difficult because our audience is pretty variable in the tasting room, and it's such a small volume of beer that gets put over there. A lot of it seems to get driven off just the excitement from within our group, of whether it's folks at Deschutes and getting a pint after work over at the tasting room, and people talking about how exciting it is. But once it feels like that's the success there, then we transition it to being brewed at the pubs, and so that we can get a broader audience look and kind of see what it looks like as far as sales data at the pub, and does it crack the top 5 as a new beer, or whatever style that we're looking at as far as like a comparison. So that's a big part of our analysis. We also do a fair amount of like surveys within like Deschutes itself. So, if in that initial portion, once it gets commercialized in that stage 3, in that small release, we try to give a 6-pack to every co-owner and have them fill out a survey of what they think of the beer, how well, do they think it would perform in that style within the market or the market as a whole. And then trying to survey distributors, trying to survey, folks at the pub. That one's somewhat tough because not everybody loves filling out surveys,
Yeah.
So people like drinking beer and chatting. So
yeah. Cool. All right. Well, thanks again so much, Vern.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and hope we'll get a beer next time in spring when we're back in person.
Sounds great.
All right. All right, folks, that is the end of our technical program. I just want to thank all 4 of our speakers again, and also big thank you to Christina, the Zoom master.
I forgot about that.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for tuning in. I think Christina has a few notes to leave us with.
Yeah, just a couple of things. So thank you everybody for joining us. The recordings will be available in the coming weeks, and all of the presentations. So you'll be able to find those on our district website, along with the minutes. We are going to move into a happy hour. So if you would like to stay on and join us, grab a beer. Those that stay on, I'll go ahead and move you on to the screen so we can see your faces and chat with you. If you're not staying with us, again, thank you so much for joining us. We miss seeing you in person, and we look forward to spring. So I'm going to stay positive that we will be in Hood River in May. Yeah, Doug, are you still there? Do you have any final words?
I am here. I'm staring at a bumper of a Toyota Camry. Yes, Robert and the technical committee for, again, getting us some innovative programming, that takes us into thinking about things we may not have considered before. It's always a attractive aspect of our technical programming is that whatever size, style, type of brewery you have worked in or are currently working in, I think we get some new perspectives on different ways of thinking about things. So it's definitely a continuing of one's education. So I think that's one of our primary goals, and I think we continue to succeed in that. So that's all kind of due to that technical committee being active and talking about what's next. So thanks to them, and thanks again to Robert. And we'll look forward to seeing everybody in Hood River in May.
Absolutely. And if you missed, if you joined late and you missed anything that you wanted to see early on, I was live streaming this via the Oregon Brewers Guild YouTube page, and I will leave that up so that you can go back and rewatch it if you need to. So thanks everybody. And if you're